After Sister Leaf pulls poor Maggie out of that corrosive red mist, Maggie quickly transforms back into her normal form. Sister Lightning immediately checks her to ensure she's not hurt anywhere. Since there are no burns or visible injuries on Maggie, Sister Leaf concludes it might be because of Maggie's devil form. Her devil form might be less susceptible to damage. Either way, they're just glad the devils are dead. Later, they arrive back at the castle. As soon as they step down, Lightning can barely contain her excitement as she rushes to give the prince the good news that they've defeated the devils, and everyone's safe. The prince, though happy to hear this, wants a clear rundown of what exactly went down. Sister Lightning eagerly starts explaining their exploits and how much she contributed to the devil hunt. That's when Nightingale throws both of them some death glares for fighting the devils alone. Poor Lightning tries to remind her senior that at least they won, but it's not enough to escape Nightingale's wrath. She ends up taking a playful flick to her forehead. Anyhow, they turn their attention back to the devils. The first thing they notice is that these monsters don't seem much stronger than normal people at a glance. However, Agatha quickly reminds them not to underestimate any devil. Whether they have magic or not, a devil is a formidable opponent. Agatha then asks if the devils really appeared near the town, and the prince confirms it. According to Leaf, they were about 2 miles from the wall. Meanwhile, Ash begins sifting through the crushed remains of the devils in order to search for any magic stones. The prince doesn't seem to understand why the devil's blood has a different color than humans. While human blood is red because it transports oxygen, the devils don't seem to breathe at all. Also, their skeletons are wider, which is not that surprising, especially their resilience and stamina require a larger body. They seem very similar to humans, so out of curiosity, he pulls up the devil's skirt to see if it has any reproductive organs. Agatha then explains, to the best of her knowledge, that the concepts of sex and gender don't exist in devil culture. It's always been a mystery since no one has been able to get near the red mist towers. Some people believe devils are born from the concentration of red mist, but the scholarly guild doesn't think so. After centuries of warfare, many have witnessed the ascension of devils. In simpler terms, ascension means that some devils reappear on the battlefield after suffering severe injuries, with their bodies changing. But from their scars, it's obvious they're the same devil. This might mean that high-tier devils aren't born, their power evolves after battles, and even their bodies may change. The prince reflects on how their magic stones were already a significant concern, but now that the enemy has the ability to evolve, it's even more worrying. It makes sense why humans haven't been able to defeat these monsters. Fortunately, the monsters don't have equipment that's more advanced than the current age. In fact, their gear is even cruder. They wear animal skins and rough cloth as clothing, and their fighting masks are just skulls of hybrid demons. The craftsmanship is very coarse. While inspecting one of the monsters, the prince finds a stone tablet and asks Agatha about it. Agatha explains that it's their method of recording information. The writings on it are created with magic, but humans wouldn't be able to decipher it. Princess Tilly then points out that perhaps the devil's minds are structured differently from humans. The prince acknowledges this, but remains curious about the stone itself. Agatha then reveals that sensory stones, pathfinding stones, and marking stones are all commonly used by scouting devils. The mention of scouting devils leaves the prince a little concerned. From what he can tell, the devils have already noticed this place and are beginning to scout it out, which likely means they've also taken note of the border town. However, Agatha claims that this scenario is unlikely. According to records from the Second Divine War, the devils wouldn't be so careless if they were investigating a human civilization. Devil scouts are typically organized in teams of 2 or 3 to ensure they can return with intel. Most teams had demon dragons with them and would never operate too far apart from one another. To eliminate these scout teams, the Alliance would send flying witches to block them from behind, while divine warriors attacked and captured them from the front. By the end of the war, the scouting teams had grown larger, sometimes including flying devils and fearsome devils. There would be no reason for them to send just 2 normal devils for scouting missions. Ash points out that the devils' weapons seem lacking. Could it be that they didn't see the border town as a significant threat? But as far as Agatha is concerned, this doesn't add up. During the Alliance era, even a smaller border town would have had witches to guard it. It's impossible that the devils wouldn't know how humanity has changed over the past 400 years. Their scouts should be armed the same way they were during the Second Divine War. The prince feels a wave of relief, thinking that maybe the devils aren't planning to confront the border town after all. Agatha agrees, but with a touch of caution. She explains that the devils probably didn't even know a town was nearby. They were likely just investigating the area around their camp. They were expecting to fight demons, not humans, which is why they didn't carry weapons they could use repeatedly, like spears or thunderstones. However, the prince's relief quickly turns to fear when he realizes what Agatha just implied, that the devils have their own camp. Agatha confirms it with a grave tone, explaining that otherwise the devils wouldn't have walked all this way. Now that they've established a base in the fertile lands, they're likely using it to expand into the wastelands. or rather, what used to be the Four Kingdoms. Just the thought that the enemy is building a base right outside his door has the prince sweating his balls. He asks Agatha if their hideout behind the mountains would also be considered a base. Agatha confirms this, explaining that during the war, a scouting station would typically have numerous mist towers, with 100 to 200 devils guarding it. But since the Red Moon hasn't arrived yet, it's unlikely they would build a new base with towers. Also, it's very inconvenient for them to transport mist, so the base wouldn't be very big. His sister then asks what he is planning next. Roland quickly rolls out that he'll find the camp, and if it exists, then he'll eliminate it. Ash supports this idea and vouches to help, promising her support. The prince immediately assigns Lightning and Maggie to scouting duty, and the two ladies are more than happy to oblige. He tells them that they won't be fighting the devils this time. They're to return as soon as they find the camp, as the devils might have dragons with them, and their safety is the most important thing. To motivate them, he promises that if they find the camp, he'll treat them to a week of desserts and ice cream bread. A while later, Sister Lightning is roaming around the desolate area, searching for the monster's hideout. That's when they stumble across a giant hole in the ground. Afterward, when they report back to the prince, it turns out that Lightning had brought Soraya along, and Soraya helped sketch the pit they found. The prince looks at the drawing and can tell it looks familiar. Lightning further explains that the location had only broken stones, a destroyed fence, and of course, the huge hole. It's similar to the stone tower they found with Agatha inside, and it was completely empty. No devils were found at all. For a moment, the prince wonders if this might have been caused by a giant worm, just like before. If the worm swallowed the ruins last time, then perhaps another one swallowed this camp. Soraya then adds that the location was right in front of the path the association was following last time, which is about 5 miles from where they first encountered the devils. Sylvie chimes in, noting that the tunnel beneath the hole seems to be heading toward the snowy mountains. It's in the same direction as the misty forest, and it all seems to be leading the same way. The scene then transitions to Timothy's royal palace, where he sits on his throne. A man with daggers steps forward and quickly throws them at a statue, promising that once the traitor Roland appears before him, he'll make sure to complete the task. But Timothy is unsure if this petty trick will be enough to assassinate Roland. The assassin, however, quickly assures him that it will. He claims that at least 10 rats have died by his hands, and once he blends into the crowd, no one will be able to tell where the daggers came from. Timothy still isn't convinced, so he gestures for his knight to step forward and tells the assassin that if he defeats the knight, he'll be generously paid. But the assassin responds that he doesn't fight head-on like this. Well, this is enough reason for Timothy to get rid of him, and the poor assassin guy ends up meeting his end. Timothy then turns to his minister and asks about the snow powder research. The minister solemnly reports that it's not going well. The blacksmiths have tried to create 10 different weapons, but none of them come close to the destructive power that was reported. Only a small number of the weapons could pierce a knight's armor, but their accuracy drops off after 50 paces. Even worse, even if they recruit every blacksmith and apprentice in the city, they'd only be able to produce around 20 pipes a month, and they can't even guarantee that all of them will work. To make matters worse, 4 of the weapons have already exploded during testing, and the soldiers are getting antsy about using them. Timothy is visibly displeased with all this bad news. He's frustrated that his options for defeating Roland are limited to pills and snow powder. But the Holy City wants to wait until the months of demons are over before even discussing pill trades. He doesn't understand how a traitor like Roland could be living so comfortably in the western region and wants him dead as soon as possible. As Timothy fumes, a white-haired old man enters and informs him that 2 messengers from the Kingdom of Dawn have arrived at the capital. Apparently, Otis Lucy and Belinda Lucy of the Deer family are waiting in the office and have requested his presence. Once they're settled in the office, Timothy wastes no time expressing his curiosity. He remarks how unusual it is for the King of Dawn to send representatives during the months of demons, which makes him eager to know the king's exact intentions. Timothy also makes it clear that if they've come seeking food, cotton, or cloth, he can only provide a small amount, and even that is offered out of sheer curiosity. Timothy reminds Otis that the succession decree has caused massive turmoil in the kingdom. Many supply chains are paralyzed, and they barely have enough resources to care for their own refugees. Diverting more is incredibly difficult. Both guests bow their heads to apologize. However, they point out that their king has sent them because of a much bigger threat looming on the horizon. Apparently, the church's armies have already sacked Eternal Winter and Wolfheart, and a flood of refugees is pouring into Dawn. The King of Dawn believes Wolfheart won't be the church's last target. It seems the church is planning to completely wipe out the upper class and take control of all territories for themselves. This puts both Dawn and Greycastle at great risk. In the coming years, the church may very well start a new war to raze them both to the ground. The King of Dawn wishes to form an alliance against the church. Otis promptly presents a series of tactics along with a written agreement. He urges Timothy to sign it if he's willing to fight back. If they focus their firepower on Grey Castle's Blizzard Mountain or Dawn's northern slopes, the church may retreat. Avoiding this war would be beneficial for both kingdoms. For Timothy, this meant he wouldn't be able to buy pills from the church. And without those pills, he isn't sure how he'll be able to defeat Roland. However, the church is just as dangerous, and the best move for him might be to unify his castle first and deal with the church later. Timothy acknowledged that this is an extremely important matter. He'll need to discuss it with his advisors. In the meantime, the guests can wait in the castle until he makes his final decision. He then asks Otis if he knows anything about the situation in Eternal Winter and Wolfheart. Otis reveals that they've gathered some information from spies, but there's not much to go on. Timothy then shifts the conversation, asking if Otis knows anything about Garcia Wimbledon of the Black Fleet. Belinda responds, saying there are rumors that she died in the church's crossfire, along with the King of Wolfheart. This shocks Timothy, and he asks if they've found her corpse. Otis responds with a no, though the church's announcement and Wolfheart's silence suggest they didn't survive. Once they leave, Timothy relishes the fact that his sister is dead, and he is looking forward to sending Roland to the heavens as well. The scene transitions to Slumber Island, where a merchant is utterly boggled by the sight of how many houses the witches have built in just half a month. He finally believes that Princess Tilly wasn't lying. Also, I have forget the names of these two Slumber Island witches. Let's call this Ponytail Girl Witch 1, and the other with black head Witch 2. Witch 1 comments that the princess never lies, to which the merchant agrees. He now has no issue with relocating people to the Slumber Island. Witch 2 mentions that she also included a heating method she learned from the western region. The beds are connected to furnaces, so as long as there's firewood burning, they stay warm. With layers of wood, straw, and blankets, the beds are much more comfortable than any furniture, especially in winter. The merchant can see that this is an interesting design. He invites Witch 2 to come work at Crescent Moon Bay. He has plots of undeveloped land, and with her skills, he's sure she can make them flourish. He's willing to pay her generously in money if she agrees. But Witch 2 quickly declines, stating that she doesn't plan on leaving the island. The merchant persists, trying to allure her by promising better living conditions. He tells her she could live in the same courtyard as him, enjoy fine wines, and taste delicacies from all four kingdoms. Not only that, she would have servants by her side wherever she goes. This is the lifestyle people crave, and if she works for him, she can also enjoy it. But Witch 1 quickly interjects, reminding this fat ass that they can't just agree to this. There are certain things witches aren't allowed to do. The merchant, clearly annoyed by their refusal, is about to protest further when suddenly Thunder appears. He interrupts, telling the merchant that the Slumber Spell Merchant Guild is unique both in the Bay and across all four kingdoms. It will do just fine without his business. The merchant is stunned to see Thunder, the big cheese himself, standing behind him. Thunder continues to humble this fat bastard, reminding him that he drafted the rules for the Slumber Spell Guild. The contractor has the privilege of assessing the task's danger, and they can't just throw themselves into danger recklessly. He asks the merchant if he still has any objections. The merchant, of course, quickly responds with the no. With that, the merchant decides to leave, and everyone waves him goodbye in exchange. The two witches are happy to see Thunder and are glad that he helped them. Thunder reveals that he was passing by Slumber Island after an expedition. During his trip, he saw waves rising higher than he'd ever seen before. The boat was almost flying, sailing on the waves' sheer cliffs. By some miracle, they didn't fall and sink. He claims that if he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, he would never have believed such a thing. Witch 1 quickly responds that since seawater isn't made of rocks, why would it flow downward? Thunder laughs and explains that he has named it the Ocean Line. It's north of Shadow Island, and the wall looks like a long line that stretches infinitely. It splits the sea into two very distinct regions, and he is planning to make this his next destination for his adventures that are to come. Later, the witches are gathered in a room on Slumber Island, talking about how much they miss the delicious food from Border Town. They're especially craving the birdkiss mushrooms. They drool as they imagine all the tasty food that Prince Roland had. Not just that, they're also missing the warm showers with bubbles and soap. One of the witches regrets that she only went to drop off Princess Tilly and had to come back, so she didn't get to enjoy anything. As everyone is talking about the border towns and Roland Wimbledon, the witch 2, whose name I still don't know, sits quietly in the corner of the room. As she's getting ready to sleep, her mind drifts to the thought of how she might have a romantic relationship if she were to work with Roland Wimbledon. But she worries whether Princess Tilly would even accept Prince Roland. She wishes for the two siblings to stay together so that every witch can go to the border town and live happily there. Sorry guys, I had to call them Witch 1 and Witch 2 because I seriously forgot their names. Finally, we transition back to the border town, where we see Nana heading to the hospital. As she's leaving, she doesn't forget to wave goodbye to Lady Ada. Lady Ada asks if Nana is coming back for lunch, to which the little one replies yes. As Nana makes her way through the village, Everyone greets her, and she seems to hold a special place in their hearts. Well, it's not surprising, especially since she's cured so many people before. Before Nana enters the hospital, the guards mention that there are no patients today, but some of her friends are here to visit. As soon as Nana enters, Sister Lotus jumps at her and gives her a warm hug. Lotus explains that it was Moon who suggested to visit the hospital, as there's nothing left to do at the castle. Lily is also there, and with her usual arrogance, she tells everyone to stop causing a ruckus. She might have plenty of time on her hands, but she still has to examine a ton of bacteria. But Moon brutally reminds her that she literally saw Lily falling asleep just a minute ago. Anyway, Nana is just happy that they came to visit her. Even Lily decides to conduct her experiments later since they're causing too much noise. When Lotus asks what they're planning to do, she flashes all of the cards. Although many of the witches don't know how to play the game, Nana steps up and votes to play anyway. They spend the rest of the day playing until night arrives. Even after taking a refreshing bath, Moon does not seem to be feeling good at all. She expresses how envious she feels of Nana. Moon envies her because Nana is always getting attention from everyone in the town. They treat her so well, constantly offering her greetings and kindness. Moon wishes she could have a life like that. But Lily pushes her aside, reminding her that both Nana and Lily herself are the foundation of the town's medical resources. Everyone's health is kept safe by one treating the outside and the other treating the inside. Moon is frustrated that she has not contributed or helped anyone at all. Because of this, she ends up seeking out Prince Roland the very next day. Roland has no clue why she's visiting him, so he guesses that she might have been bullied and is here to complain. But that's not the case. She flat out reminds him how he always mentions that she has a lot of potential, yet she hasn't evolved. She's pretty sure the reason her ability hasn't evolved is because she can't understand Natural Science 101. Now that Moon has mentioned it, Prince Roland claims that he's been thinking about it lately as well. According to Agatha, he explains that the Witches' Alliance achieved ascension without fully understanding natural processes 400 years ago. They did it through continuous practice of their abilities and occasional epiphanies. These moments of realization could happen either by observing events in real life or through sudden insights. However, ascension through that method is not as thorough as systematic education. Agatha's magic is evidence of that. She's the weakest of all the ascended witches, and even some regular witches like Sylvie and Andrea are stronger than her. All of this goes over Moon's head, and she simply points out that she just wants to evolve, so simply asks if he has any solutions to her problem. Prince Roland states that it might not work, but he can try. He begins by asking her about her perspective on magnetism. Moon explains that it's a physical phenomenon produced by the motion of electric charges, resulting in attractive and repulsive forces between objects. Prince Roland reminds her that she just quoted from a textbook, and while she has it memorized nicely, he doesn't think she truly understands what it means. He then draws a diagram of the inner workings of a motor, and explains that she can't use closed circuits to quickly cut lines of magnetic force, but she can change her own magnetic fields. As a result, she can personally influence the transformation from magnetism to electricity. Electromagnetism essentially results from changes in magnetic flux within a closed loop. If she wants to change the magnetic flux within a constant magnetic field, the only way to do so is by changing the area within the loop. In other words, she needs to cut and shorten the wire. But what if the area is consistent? In that case, she must change the field, which will then change the magnetic flux. He points out that she needs to quickly release and withdraw her magnetism, instead of continuously using her power. It's okay if she doesn't understand it right away, but he tells her to try changing the direction of her magnetism, like switching from her left hand to her right. She needs to practice this first. Once she gets the hang of it, he'll prepare a little toy for her, and when she understands it, she'll know what it all means. The thought of having a toy really perks her up. Later, we meet Moon once again. Following Prince Roland's instructions, he had told her to hold the frame with both hands and practice using her ability. But before doing so, he had told her to close the curtains and put her glowstone away. Afterwards, she grabs the frame with both of its rods, and as soon as she begins to use her magic, she notices the glass connected to both rods starting to glow. The glow intensifies further, and suddenly, the entire tube glows brightly, leaving Moon absolutely bewildered. The next day, she visits Prince Roland again and questions him about why the glass started glowing. Hearing this, Prince is quite fascinated that she managed to do it so quickly, as he had expected it would take her at least 2 days to make any progress. He then asks if she realizes that the glass illuminated like an electric light bulb. When she confirms it, he's happy to hear that she used the power of lightning. This revelation leaves Moon completely confused. As Prince dissects the light bulb, he reminds her that the light was orange and kept shining only for a moment. The lightning ignited the filament inside, causing it to burn and emit light. But it's okay if she doesn't fully understand it. He promises to show her what real electricity looks like soon. Later, Moon comes back to her room, where Lily asks her why she is up so early, and she further orders Moon to bring her breakfast. But Moon doesn't like Lily's attitude. She proceeds to close the curtains and sit in the chair, as she needs to practice her powers in the dark, with the glowstone put away. Reluctantly, Lily shuts her book and decides to leave. However, the thought of Lily leaving scares Moon a little, since she doesn't like the dark. After some teasing, Lily decides to stay. Once Moon settles into the chair to begin her session, Lily asks if she plans to magnetize the object with her hands. Moon responds with a no, explaining that she's going to cycle magnetism through her hands. Prince said she might be able to see lightning if she does. Of course, Lily is baffled and isn't ready to believe it right away. But Moon sits down and begins her practice. As she concentrates, she remembers Kara, the former leader of the Witch Association. Moon is sure that if Kara were here, she would be yelling at her by now, as she always considered Moon useless. But Moon is glad that Prince isn't like that. In fact, he even made special equipment for her to practice with, and he swapped the metal wire inside for a copper one. Determined to prove her worth, she begins her practice. Light soon starts to radiate, and before long, she is able to illuminate almost the entire room. This leaves Lily completely baffled. As Moon takes notes, she realizes that electricity becomes magnetism, and magnetism becomes electricity. In other words, they are the same. The next day, Moon demonstrates her abilities to Prince, who is left completely speechless. He can hardly believe his eyes as she produces an electrical system without any power source. He has no doubt that her ability is of the enchanting type, and that she's introduced a brand new attribute to the metal frame, using magic to provide power. Moon happily points out that, just as he had said, electricity and magnetism are related, they can't exist without each other. The fact that her ability can magnetize objects, she realized, might also be able to create electricity with it, since electricity requires magnetism. She tried applying magnetism to the bronze rods, and then this happened. Prince is quite pleased with Moon's epiphany. He now feels certain that electrical currents result in magnetism. However, magnetic fields don't create electrical currents without reason. The currents must travel in a closed circuit, with magnetism changing alongside them. Changing both the strength and area of magnetism typically requires an external energy source, but Moon's new ability replaces that requirement, causing magnetism to change on its own. Prince is now certain that witch abilities shouldn't be measured strictly by logic. Moon's magnetic magic might not adhere to the rules of real magnetism, just as black fire isn't actual fire. He addresses Moon curiously and asks if she has ever noticed any changes in the magnetism of objects she has enchanted. Moon recalls trying something like that back at the Witch Association. She had wanted to lower the magnetism of an object when she wasn't using it, so it would be less troublesome for her sisters. However, no matter what she tried, the magnetism maintained its strength, and she assumed it was impossible to adjust. Prince then turns to Nightingale and asks her to describe the form of Moon's magic. Nightingale promptly responds, saying it looks solidified, like a shifting pool of water. This revelation means one thing: Moon has evolved. Prince pats her on the head, appreciating her hard work and consistency, as her evolution wouldn't have been possible without her dedication. He declares her the 6th evolved witch in the Witch Union. This lights up Moon, who is thrilled to know she can now be of even greater use to Prince. Prince continues, expressing that there's so much potential in Moon that he can't even count it all. As he said before, her potential is limitless. He tells her to get some sleep first, noting that her eye bags are almost the size of a fist. He promises to properly test her abilities later that afternoon. With that, the poor, tired Moon sluggishly walks out to get some well-deserved rest. Meanwhile, Nightingale seems to be deep in thought. She quickly locks the door behind her, then jumps over to Prince and gets uncomfortably close to him. While Prince wonders if Nightingale is coming in for some intimacy, all his hopes of a playful moment are dashed when Nightingale, with a worried look, asks him how she can evolve her abilities as well, without needing to study Natural Science 101. Taking Moon's exam scores into account, there's no way she truly understood anything related to natural science. Yet Prince still helped her evolve. So Nightingale also wants to know how he managed to do it, and if perhaps she needs a toy to aid her evolution as well. Prince sighs and highlights that evolving her abilities through a sudden epiphany might be very difficult. Agatha had mentioned that such evolution requires witnessing an occurrence related to one's ability in the real world. However, Nightingale's mist magic is so bizarre that even he has no idea how it works, so he's unsure how to guide her. Still, he believes there's one way to solidify her magic. She would need to learn a lot about physics, natural sciences, and advanced mathematics. Of course, to Nightingale, this sounds like Prince is suggesting something impossible, especially with the mention of advanced mathematics. She grumbles in frustration and, feeling disappointed, turns to leave. Later, we see Moon along with Prince and Nightingale as well. Apparently, Moon is here to demonstrate her abilities. Prince names Moon's ability as unconditional magnetism. This ability can be applied to any object, just as she had done before. She can enchant any object with her magnetism, but it depends on its conductivity. However, her magic is the weakest among all evolved witches. Currently, she can only make 2 stones glow on the divine sigil, which is half a stone less than Maggie. Additionally, her ability drains a large amount of stamina, and the strength and longevity of the magnetism increase with the amount of magic she uses. After testing, it's clear that Moon's new ability can function as a reliable battery. However, it's nowhere near enough to power heavy machinery or match the efficiency of a steam engine. Prince is deeply moved by how hard Moon worked to evolve her magic. He acknowledges that it wasn't easy, and despite the limitations, it's possible for Moon to advance further with systematic education. Her magical capacity also has room to grow. Agatha had mentioned that if multiple witches work together, they can create glowstones that can last longer. So, if they could gain a witch who can manipulate or transfer magic to others, Moon's strength wouldn't be limited to just herself. Roland visits his sister and inquires about any witches who can transfer magic. Unfortunately, she responds that she doesn't know of any, but she claims that she knows where he might find someone like that. The witch Tilly speaks of is named Spear Passy. She possesses a unique ability to form a connection between witches, allowing the magic of multiple individuals to be linked, making her skill set potentially invaluable for Roland's needs. Passy resides at Dragon's Cliff, where she holds the dual status of both a marquis and a territorial lord. Her father, the previous lord, passed down his position and land to her despite her being a witch. Thanks to the grandeur of her estate, Passy has been able to hide her identity well, living a life of luxury compared to most witches. She even played a pivotal role during the migration to Sleeping Island, helping Tilly gather witches from the southern region with remarkable speed. This contribution significantly aided their cause. However, when Roland expresses surprise that Passy doesn't actively shelter witches, Tilly explains that Passy prioritizes her governing position over anything else. Passy has made it clear that protecting her status is critical to maintaining her influence. Tilly recounts that Passy once explicitly told her that if witches were captured by townsfolk, she would find a way to smuggle them out, often replacing them with other prisoners. However, if the witches were captured by the Divine Punishment Army or the Church, she would not intervene. Tilly advises Roland to try reaching out to Passy but cautions him that her assistance is not guaranteed. Passy's motivations are complex, and while she may offer help, she won't risk compromising her position or territory. Prince acknowledges Tilly's insights and decides to send ambassadors to negotiate with Spear Passy regarding her potential assistance. After discussing this, Tilly brings up an intriguing topic. Another witch has recently evolved. Prince explains that it was Moon who solidified her magic. He adds that relying on the old methods to evolve witches' abilities is far from ideal. True evolution, like Anna's, requires a foundation of solid knowledge and systematic education. Tilly then references a theory Prince had mentioned previously, something that fascinated her. She asks him to elaborate on his statement. An ability is a manifestation of magic that is an unnatural phenomenon. Prince explains that this is his personal theory. He elaborates by using Anna as an example. Her black fire, he explains, doesn't exist in nature. It is clearly a manifestation of magic. As for the basic fire manipulation Anna possessed before evolving, he speculates that witches initially project their abilities mentally, which leads to their ability to manipulate magic. Over time, as their understanding and perception grow, their magic evolves and changes state. This theory aligns with Agatha's experience as well. Prince points out that many witches have similar abilities before they evolve, likely because they witness the same natural phenomena in their surroundings. However, once they reach higher-tier awakenings, their powers become dramatically unique. This, he believes, is due to the vastly different experiences and perceptions each witch has accumulated in their lives. Now that Prince has framed it this way, Tilly finds it makes sense. After exchanging these deep, cerebral ideas with her brother, Tilly suddenly shifts the conversation, asking if he came from a world without magic. This unexpected and pointed question leaves Roland choking on his tea. Gathering himself, he cautiously asks her how she came to such a conclusion. Tilly explains that over the past month, she's carefully read all of his writings and theories. While she found them insightful, something always felt off. It wasn't until his latest explanation that she realized what the problem was. Apparently, he treats magic as completely separate from the natural world. For instance, Natural Science 101 and Physics 101, neither of them mentions magic at all. According to him, magic isn't a natural phenomenon, even though it clearly exists. Roland feels cornered by the points Tilly raised with such valid logic. He never imagined, even in his wildest thoughts, that a normal person would notice something like that when learning such complicated knowledge. But it turns out Tilly Wimbledon is more than just a royal genius fourth princess. She's also a transcendent witch. Just as he thinks he's in trouble, Tilly reassures him that he doesn't have to spill all the beans right away. It has gotten pretty late, so she's heading back to the dorms, and she tells him he should get some rest too. She hopes to keep trusting him. With that, she leaves, and Nightingale steps out from her hiding place. Even Nightingale looks disappointed because Princess Tilly was so close to uncovering Roland's true origins. If only she had pried a little more. Roland sighs in disappointment and points out that she didn't pry because she doesn't want to risk losing their relationship. If prying meant breaking their alliance, it wouldn't benefit Slumber Island, especially with the same looming threat still hanging over them. Her status as an ally is more important than the truth of his identity. Roland believes this is the only reason Tilly's giving him some time, but that doesn't mean she doesn't want to know the truth. If she keeps stalling, she might lose her trust once their enemies are defeated. Tilly's played her hand, and now she's waiting for his, but Roland still hasn't figured out what she thinks of the fourth prince. Regardless, he has to bury that worry deep for now. He turns to Nightingale and asks for her opinion about the trip to Dragon's Cliff with Maggie and Lightning. Nightingale agrees to go, but Roland reminds her that it won't be a simple conversation, and he's actually worried about it. Of course, Nightingale assures him that if talking doesn't work, she'll just kidnap her. But that's exactly what Roland is worried about. He doesn't want to kidnap anyone. Spear Passy would probably rip their hearts out if she did that. He begs her not to mess this up. She should gather some intel about the situation before meeting with Spear Passy. If she rejects the offer, that's fine, but there's no need to threaten her at all. He also tells her to keep a record of Dragon Cliff's environment, defenses, and patrol schedules. Lastly, he reminds her to return as soon as possible and, most importantly, to stay safe. The very next day, Maggie, Lightning, and Nightingale set off on their journey, and Sister Scroll waves them goodbye through the window. Meanwhile, Roland is busy making notes. He looks totally worn out because he's just strained half of his brain cells writing this book. As he thinks this, Scroll remembers that tomorrow is Miss Anna's awakening day. In the middle of the night, Prince Roland visits Anna. After taking in the surroundings of her room, he reflects on how everything in here gives a strange sense of modernism, with the indoor heating and glowing stones. As he stares at Anna, she responds, asking why he's staring at her. Roland admits that he was indeed staring, which makes Anna a little happy. Anna then feels kind of selfish, thinking about how everyone seems to care about her, but she doesn't pay much attention to anyone else. Roland just laughs and tells her she's being too harsh on herself. Anna points out that if Miss Agatha hadn't mentioned those old methods, she wouldn't have asked the prince to come here. She bets that the other sisters will also request him to stay with them on their day of awakening, which will keep him busy. Roland reassures her that it's fine. He is sure that they'd ask for extra ice cream or bread instead. You see, when Agatha learned that Anna's awakening day was coming up soon, she immediately offered her prior experience from Tequila City. According to the Scholar Guild's research, besides exhausting their magic to reduce the effects of the anti-phase, witches also have to pay attention to their personal emotions. For example, feelings of satisfaction and joy can provide great benefits to their health. The Alliance would even send servants to assist accomplished witches and meet their needs. However, having servants around his favorite girl Anna doesn't sit well with Roland, so it looks like he's personally here for her emotional support. He promptly gifts her a book, which is a present for her awakening day. The book is apparently about calculus. The reason she's receiving all this special treatment is because awakening days are like the start of a new life. Of course, Anna likes the book, but she puts it aside for now, which confuses Roland. He asks her if she's not planning to read it, but Anna quickly leans over to him, expressing her desire to hear more special stories from him. She gets even closer and sits on top of him and hugs him tighter. Previously, when he told her stories, she had fallen asleep. So this time, Roland decides to pick up the story about the huge city he lived in. Just as he begins, she stops him because she already knows the history of Grey Castle and the numerous times it's been told. But what fascinates him is that what he is telling does not align with what she has heard, so she is more interested in learning why that is. She gently pushes him onto the bed and lays on top of him. Seeing how hesitant he always is to talk about his past, Anna decides not to press him for more details. Instead, she proposes a game. She'll try to guess his past life by herself and record everything she observes in her books. Later, Roland will have to see her observations, and if more than 50% of them are accurate, he'll have to tell her the truth. Roland realizes this isn't about winning or losing. It's just Anna's way of comforting him, and she's not really interested in the real answers. Among all the witches, she's the one who's closest to him and understands his thoughts, so he promises to accept her deal. The scene shifts back to Maggie and Lightning, who are on their way to Dragon's Cliff. Meanwhile, inside the castle, we meet Spear Passy, who immediately senses a strange presence and quickly asks the intruder about their identity. It's of course our girl Nightingale, who promptly appears in front of Passy and greets her. Naturally, Passy is shocked by her sudden appearance. Nightingale introduces herself and explains that she comes from the border town of the Western region, and she is a witch. Spear Passy isn't surprised that Nightingale is a witch, since no ordinary person could have snuck inside, though she did not like the fact that Nightingale snuck in without knocking the door. Nightingale replies that she simply wanted to avoid all the guards on the way in, and assures Passy that she comes in peace, and is here only to discuss matters. She further reassures Passy that she doesn't have to use the crossbow hidden under her desk. Finally, Passy asks the reason for her visit. Nightingale explains that she's here to deliver a message from the ruler of the border town, who is the protector of the western region and the fourth prince of Grey Castle, Roland Wimbledon. He has built a new order in the western region that allows both mortals and witches to coexist, and Nightingale is here in the hope that Passy will show her support. Naturally, Spear Passy is bewildered to hear that, of all people, the supposedly good-for-nothing fourth prince has tried to contact her. She finds it hard to believe what Nightingale is saying, and doubts Roland is truly the ruler of the border town. As far as she knows, he's an idiot who was granted rights to a wasteland. Nightingale smirks and comments that Timothy cheated his way to the throne, and soon enough, Roland will sack him and become the new king. However, she quickly dismisses these points as unimportant, and gets to the matter at hand. She's here to invite Spear Passy to visit the border town. The prince wishes to borrow her magic transfer ability to strengthen another witch's power. This leaves Spear Passy on high alert. She sternly inquires if this is supposed to be a threat or an invitation. Nightingale casually points out that it's just an invitation. The prince has no intention of forcing a witch to do anything, and frankly, neither does she. She adds that she's not a fan of coercion in any form. Hearing this, Spear Passy decides to reject the offer. She states that if Roland truly needs her help, he can come to Dragon's Cliff himself, with the manners of an elite. Sneaking into her castle won't earn him any favors, and she won't risk drawing the church's attention by associating with someone who doesn't respect proper protocols. Now that Passy has rolled out her final decision, Nightingale prepares to leave, which, of course, baffles Spear Passy. She had expected Nightingale to try harder to persuade her. Nightingale calmly reminds her that she's just a messenger. She delivered the message, received the answer, and now her mission is complete. Passy, still curious, asks how Roland even knows about her abilities. As far as she can tell, it must have been the witches at the Bay who told him. Nightingale responds positively, and explains that the leader of the Bay Witches, Tilly Wimbledon, is currently staying at the border town. She's actively fighting against the monstrous demons alongside her brother, Prince Roland. Furthermore, Tilly herself was invited by Roland, just as Passy has been. Even so, Spear Passy finds it hard to believe that Roland has truly built a place where mortals and witches can coexist freely. Nightingale then reveals that Roland has cleared the church entirely out of his territory. Border Town now shelters more than 10 witches, and the townsfolk are familiar with their presence. The witches are not just accepted, they are thriving in his domain. Nightingale promises that everything she's saying is true and offers to explain everything she knows about Prince Roland and Border Town. She takes her time and summarizes the story of 250 chapters in just a few minutes. As Nightingale finishes her explanation, Maggie suddenly appears at the window, visibly alarmed. She warns them that danger is approaching, specifically a squad of divine punishment soldiers, and there are at least 20 of them headed toward the castle. Nightingale immediately wonders if Spear Passy had arranged a meeting with the church, but Passy quickly denies it, explaining that she hasn't scheduled any meetings with anyone from the church. This revelation leads her to suspect that the divine punishment soldiers might have followed Nightingale. Nightingale dismisses the idea, stating it's impossible unless the church somehow has the ability to surveil every bird in the sky. At that moment, Lightning arrives, promptly reporting that soldiers are indeed making their way directly to the castle. Nightingale has no idea what's going on, but urges Spear Passy to come with her. But before they can act, commotion erupts outside the door, and it does not take the divine soldiers long to break their way inside the office. Nightingale quickly vanishes into the shadows before she can be seen. While hiding under her mist, Nightingale notices that at least 10 of the soldiers are carrying divine stones of retribution, a clear signal that this situation is going to be trouble. She then annoyingly glances toward the window and sees that Maggie and Lightning haven't left yet, despite the danger. Meanwhile, Spear Passy confronts a man named Redwin, demanding to know why he brought the soldiers into her castle. Redwin smirks smugly and addresses her as sister, before declaring that their late father had made a grave mistake by passing his title to the spawn of the devil. He claims he's simply here to correct that mistake. Redwin proclaims he will expose her true identity as a witch, and refuses to let someone like her rule over the castle. Passy is sure that her brother is being backed by the outer forces, especially since their father only chose her because Redwin and her other brothers were too incompetent to handle the inheritance themselves. This harsh truth enrages Redwin, and in a fit of frustration, he slaps his sister across the face. Just as things seem to be escalating, a priest appears on the scene, which only confirms Passy's suspicions that her brother is indeed working with the church. They are apparently here to capture her and take her away. The priest praises Redwin for his efforts and assures him that by the next time they meet, he'll be addressing him as Duke Redwin. a title that will come with great power. Redwin is overjoyed at the prospect of inheriting the Duke's position and ruling over Dragon's Cliff. The priest reaffirms this, but also reminds Redwin that he must adhere to the church's agreement, which includes executing Spear Passy as a witch in the plaza. This news is shocking, but Nightingale does not react. The priest goes on to tell Redwin that his position will be secured, which will benefit the church's larger plans. To further ensure his success, the church will even provide him with a cleric skilled in governance. Once they leave, Nightingale reappears, and Lightning and Maggie are ready for action. They're fired up and determined to defeat the church and save Passy. Nightingale pulls Lightning and Maggie back to reality, because they do not have enough power to take down the entire church, although they could kill and bury the group of soldiers and the priest who just arrived, allowing Spear Passy to regain her position in the Dragon Cliff once again. But Nightingale has another plan. She wants to take advantage of this opportunity to rescue Spear Passy without leaving a trace. Once she's freed, Passy might have nowhere else to go and could agree to come with them to Border Town. Later that night, she sneaks through the town to reach the underground dungeons, convinced that Passy is being held there. There's only one way inside, but it's heavily guarded by divine stones, so Nightingale knows she must tread carefully. When Nightingale finally enters the bishop's room, she encounters a mysterious priestess under a hood, who is intrigued to learn that Spear Passy turned out to be a witch. This only strengthens their plan's chances of success. The priest then inquires whether it would be easier to convince the masses of Passy's witch identity. The priestess responds that things have changed. Under the Pope's orders, new witches are to be processed by the church. Instead of burning her at the stake in front of the public, they plan to smuggle her to the Holy City. They can just simply take any prisoner with similar height and body stature as Passy and burn it in front of the public. This will make the execution even more impactful in the eyes of the public. The priestess orders the priest to follow the orders, while she is about to head for Redwater City. As Nightingale prepares to leave, the priestess suddenly senses her presence and cracks her whip, demanding to know who's there. Nightingale narrowly avoids the whip, and the attack confirms for her that this priestess is not a weak sauce. The priest, on the other hand, has no clue what is going on, and asks the priestess about it. She reveals that someone has snuck in, but assures him that she'll handle it, and orders him to leave the place at once. She then blindfolds herself and prepares to confront Nightingale. After observing the magic around the priestess, Nightingale realizes that she's a high-ranking witch who is aligned with the church. She likely ranks even higher than most, and if she enjoys hunting witches, she wouldn't hesitate to kill her fellow witch. This witch is not someone who would think of Nightingale as a sister. Meanwhile, the priestess begins her interrogation. She points out that Priest Rosade wasn't able to see Nightingale, suggesting that she knows how to hide herself well. Furthermore, the fact that Nightingale dodged her attack makes the priestess believe that she's trained or experienced in combat. She can tell, without a doubt, that Nightingale is rare among wild witches. This isn't just any ordinary witch. Nightingale is something different, and that makes her an even more dangerous target in the priestess's eyes. Nightingale isn't interested in responding to any of the questions this piece of shit is asking, but that white head continues to speak, revealing that a new pope has taken the seat in the church. According to her, this pope is benevolent and believes that there's still hope for wild witches like Nightingale. She offers a chance for Nightingale to be baptized and accepted as a pure witch, promising her redemption if she agrees. She believes this is an opportunity Nightingale shouldn't pass up. But Nightingale isn't about to listen to some piece of shit witch who has zero regard for her fellow witches. She fires her bullet at her, but the white-haired witch quickly deflects it with her whip. This leaves Nightingale absolutely losing it. She can't believe this witch literally blocked her bullets. At the same time, the white-haired witch is equally surprised to see her opponent using such a ridiculously eccentric weapon. That only fuels her determination to kill Nightingale right here and now, and she's made up her mind about it. The white-haired witch spreads her magic across the entire area, but Nightingale dodges left and right. As they go back and forth, the white-haired witch punches the ground so hard that it literally demolishes it. Nightingale quickly throws a barrage of bullets to distract her and vanishes into thin air the next moment. The white-haired witch can no longer feel her magic, which means Nightingale has left the room. She commands Priest Rosade to lock the church down and send more guards. She tells him to do as she says. The intruder is wounded, so she knows she can't make it far. The white-haired witch is frustrated that her opponent got away. What infuriates her the most is that Nightingale was using such a strong weapon. Her battle skills are considered the perfect balance of offense and defense. Her whip can block anything, and she even considers herself one of the strongest pure witches. She's consciously kept her magic active for 10 years, and her magical capacity is immense. She's never depleted her stamina from blocking a projectile, but she was brought to her knees because of the weapon Nightingale used. Her eyes are bleeding, probably due to the side effect of exerting herself. The scene cuts to Spear Passy, who, while sitting behind bars, thinks about the witches she wasn't able to save. They were probably imprisoned here, tortured, humiliated, and eventually killed. That's when she notices Nightingale coming to her rescue. Before the guards standing outside can notice anything, Nightingale silently slits their throats. Nightingale reveals to her that the guards didn't know Spear Passy was a witch, so they didn't realize who she really was before they captured her. This is all a plot by the bishop. They're just after the governor's position, and her brother is nothing more than a puppet of the church. Nightingale doesn't have time to explain everything, so they decide to get out of there first. But Nightingale can't let Passy inside her mist just yet, because she has a divine stone of judgment shackle, which can only be opened by a special key, so their first task is to get rid of it. As they walk through the corridor, soldiers swarm their way, but Nightingale just vanishes into her mist. Then, she pops up right in front of them and kills them with each bullet fired. In a matter of seconds, she takes down a bunch of soldiers single-handedly. Finally, they find the device they can use to remove the shackle from around Passy's neck. Once it's off, they make their way out of the chamber and notice more soldiers. But before those soldiers can launch their barrage of arrows, Nightingale and Passy hide behind a wall because the arrows have stones of divine judgment, which cancel out Nightingale's mist magic. Another barrage of arrows comes in, and in an attempt to save Passy, Nightingale ends up taking all of the arrows right over her back. But thankfully, Nightingale successfully executes her mist magic this time, and they drift into her mist, popping up at the very top of the castle's tower. Before they can catch their breath, they're found again, but that's when Maggie shows up. She smashes her giant tail into the building, and the rocks that break off begin to fall onto the soldiers below. While the soldiers are disoriented from the rocks, Maggie and Nightingale return to rescue Passy. After safely leaving the area, they set up camp somewhere in the forest. There, Passy tells Nightingale to strip down so she can tend to her injuries. Although Nightingale is embarrassed, she eventually agrees and does as told. Nightingale is swollen from the previous fight, but thankfully, it isn't as brutal as it could have been. She's patched up with medicine applied to her wounds, and after disinfecting them and wrapping the bandages, she's back in action, ready to continue. Nightingale then tries to convince Passy to visit Border Town. She tells her that the town is a sanctuary, a kind of holy mountain for witches. If she isn't interested, she can always leave, but the offer is there. With all the details and persuasion, Passy agrees to go with them the next day, which lights up Lightning's mood. Around a bonfire, Nightingale points out that the church will likely contact the Holy City about what happened, and they'll need to eliminate any messengers they send. It's only a matter of time before things escalate. 3 days later, the church and its divine soldiers are leaving the Dragon's Cliff, but just as they think they're in the clear, they're ambushed by Nightingale's group. Ash drops down from the sky like a goddamn meteor, obliterating a soldier with a single swing. The remaining soldiers rush toward her, but they meet the same fate. Andrea doesn't want Ash to hog all the spotlight, so she joins in, using her divine arrows to take down even more soldiers. The two of them make it clear that they're a force to be reckoned with. Nightingale also joins in the fray, and right at that moment, the white-haired witch pops out from the carriage. She quickly deflects all of the bullets Nightingale shoots at her, but she still ends up staring right down the barrel of Nightingale's gun. But the game is on, and both ladies engage in a Hollywood-level action scene. While Nightingale continuously shoots a barrage of bullets, the white-haired witch does her best to keep up, but it's clear she's struggling. Nightingale is easily overpowering her this time. Nightingale doesn't seem to be running out of bullets, but the white-haired witch already looks exhausted and on the brink of giving up. Eventually, the poor witch takes a bullet right over her shoulder, then another right over her chest. After taking a few more bullets, she's down for the count. She tries to retaliate even after being brutally injured, but Nightingale throws a divine judgment stone atop her, rendering her powers useless. Nightingale then points the barrel of the gun at the lady, and with the final bullet, she ends the poor witch's life. In the dead body, she finds a letter pendant with a stamp. Nightingale then pulls away the blindfold from the lady's eyes, and when she does, she notices that the woman doesn't have eyes at all. By the look of the scars, she can tell that this poor girl didn't have a comfortable life. But thankfully, from now on, she won't hurt any more witches, and she won't suffer any longer either. Lightning then approaches with a bastard who's been running away. He looks like a priest or bishop, judging by his clothes. Nightingale pulls off the piece of cloth stuffed inside his mouth, and as soon as the cloth is out, the bastard begins yapping about how they dare to murder one of Archbishop Tayfun's pure witches. But Nightingale tells this bastard that he better start worrying about himself. She stands over him, pressing her leg down, shoving the cloth back into his mouth, and then tells Lightning to hand him over to Iron Axe, as he's very experienced in interrogation. The other ladies also arrive after sweeping the battlefield, and Andrea is surprised that Nightingale took the life of a witch instead of sparing her. But Ash responds that she was just a puppet of the church. Not to mention, some witches are even worse than mortals, and she's never seen demons or devils imprison someone to torture them for years. Ash extends her hand towards Nightingale and assures her that she did a great job, so she shouldn't feel bad about it at all. Nightingale grabs her hand promptly, feeling happy that even Ash can be comforting. Lightning and Maggie also place their hands over their friends' hands, and out of the 5 of them, only Andrea remains without her hand over the group. Although she doesn't like touching hands, as a gesture of friendship, she eventually places her hand over the others. Then, they all raise their hands upward to the sky, celebrating the victory they've had. After their successful mission, the victorious witches return to Border Town, where all of them are already present outside to greet them. All of the witches concern themselves by asking the returned party about their well-being and all that stuff. The prince is also standing there, and when Nightingale looks at him, Roland promptly tells her to go take a hot shower and rest up. He's left a lot of dried fish snacks in her drawer. Later, all of them have a feast together and spend the time of their lives enjoying each other's company. After dinner, when the prince returns to his office, he finds Nightingale there. He promptly asks her if she's not going to sleep. But well, if Nightingale had gone to sleep, she would have missed hugging him today, so she stayed here. She claims she's been itching for this hug ever since they were in the castle garden. Suddenly, Spear Passy arrives outside the office, and when the prince gives her permission to come in, Nightingale retreats into her mist while Passy promptly enters the room. Once they settle down with tea laid out, they begin their conversation. Once the prince reveals everything to her regarding church and the threat of devils, Passy starts by saying that she has considered his requests. She states that while losing absolute authority, adopting the same laws, following the same markets, and abolishing succession through inheritance are all things she can agree to. She's curious and wants to know if he's really planning to enforce these changes throughout the entire Western region. As far as she's concerned, that would weaken the entire elite class, and his reputation as a traitor would be solidified. The prince then responds that this is why he's not forcing them to accept it. His main concern is divine war, which is going to define their fates, while elite's opinions are not something important to consider. He adds that he's not planning to kill them off. He just hopes they can adapt to this new order. They'll still keep their lands, and the only thing they'll lose is their absolute governance. He is sure that they will make a smart decision. Passy acknowledges this and realizes he won't be changing his mind. She also understands that if she doesn't agree to his terms, his army will likely sack her lands. The prince clarifies that what he lacks most are subordinates, especially managers with experience in bureaucracy. He reassures her that, as he said, she won't lose her territory, and she'll even be able to appear publicly as a witch without fear of threats from the church. Passy then states that she also has a condition before shaking hands. After he helps her take back Dragon's Cliffs, she'll only stand by his side once Timothy is overthrown. Hearing this, the prince recognizes it as a good answer. While it's not an outright rejection, it leaves room for negotiation. He realizes he'll have to prove that unifying Grey Castle isn't an empty promise if he wants her full support. With that in mind, the prince agrees to her terms, deciding it's a deal. Afterward, Passy humbly asks if she can also attend some of the witches' classes. The prince, surprised by her odd request, reminds her that their curriculum is still quite elementary, and she might not learn much from it. Passy responds that she finds their arithmetic fascinating. It's unlike anything she's ever seen before. Later, the prince goes down into the chambers where the priest they captured is locked up. As soon as the priest sees the prince, he begins yapping nonsense, but Iron Axe quickly shuts him up, warning that if he doesn't want to go through the same pain as last night, he should get to the point and start spilling everything he knows. Terrified, the man begins to talk and introduces himself as Campus, a resident of Hermes. The prince asks who the witch traveling with him was and what her position in the church was. Campus explains that her name was Aurora, one of Archbishop Tayfun's pure witches, but she never held a real position within the church. The prince then questions Campus further about the pure witches. The man promptly reveals that pure witches are individuals raised by the church and can only be controlled by archbishops or the pope. He admits he doesn't know much else about them. As soon as the prince hears this, he realizes that the church is highly secretive about their pure witches, but he now has more intelligence to use in his fight against them. He then questions Campus about the purpose of plotting against the Dragon's Cliff Marquis and why Aurora was being sent to Hermes. Campus claims he doesn't know the full details. His job was only to watch over Aurora, and only she knew the true objective. As for why she changed her mind and decided to return, it was because Aurora discovered that Passy was a real witch. The new pope had decreed that all captured witches should be purified in the holy city. Hearing the mention of pure witches, the prince presses Campus further, asking why, if pure witches are sinless, the church would hide their existence. Campus responds that some followers aren't faithful enough to accept the existence of pure witches, so it's only a temporary measure. They then ask Campus what his destination was after Dragon's Cliff. Campus reveals that their next stop was Redwater City, followed by Wasteland Fortress. He adds that this was all he knew, as Archbishop Taefun didn't mention a return date. They were instructed to remain at the fortress and await further orders. The prince begins to think about how these three locations, Dragon's Cliff, Redwater City, and Wasteland Fortress, are all near the western region's borders. This makes him wonder if the church's real target might be Border Town. Prince then asks this guy if he is not curious about what awaits him. The priest simply says that it doesn't matter what anyone does to him, as God will be the one to judge them in the end. Iron Axe decides to spend another night torturing the man to change his attitude, but the prince stops him, telling the priest that he will indeed receive judgment, but not from God. It will be decided by the people. The next day, in the middle of the town, the prince addresses the gathered citizens. He declares that he is here to show them an utterly shameless criminal. The soldiers throw the priest into the crowd for all to see, and the prince continues, explaining that the church has been hiding the truth from the very beginning. Had this priest not been captured, they would never have learned of such horrifying news. The church proclaims witches as filthy devils, but in reality, both the Pope and the archbishops are enslaving witches on an alarming scale. The prince questions the priest if this is all correct, to which the terrified man quickly replies with a yes. The townsfolk are shocked, unable to believe that the church would do such a thing. Some even question if he is really a priest from the Holy City. The prince reassures them, stating that the priest was sent to Grey Castle, and all his documents can verify his identity. His uniform badge, along with various letters, are plenty of evidence. Prince addresses all the citizens and tells them to remember his words: the church is enslaving witches. He explains that the church kidnaps young girls from everywhere and forces them into nunneries. There, these girls are treated like livestock. Only a small percentage become witches and receive further training, while the rest are used as the church's toys. To acquire more witches, the church doesn't just pretend to adopt orphans, they even hire criminals to kidnap them. The prince urges everyone to think about it. If the church were still active in this town, they would have lost Miss Nana. The prince tries to sway the crowd emotionally, asking them if they would ever want Nana to be destroyed by the church. Of course, the people unanimously say no. Miss Nana is no devil. She healed burns and has been a part of their lives as she grew up before their eyes. The prince then reveals that the church needs witches to maintain their power. He reminds the townsfolk of the incredible benefits of magic they've seen: Miss Nana's healing ability, Miss Lily's disinfecting magic, and so much more that could improve their lives. The prince continues to explain more ways witches have helped improve the town. For example, the army's firearms and the steam engines used in the mines are gifts from witches. However, like anything else, these tools can be used for good or evil. They can defeat demons but also harm innocent people. The prince warns that the church aims to use these tools to oppress the people because they see anyone outside their religion as damned. He calls out the hypocrisy of the church, pointing out how their actions contradict their supposed sense of justice and the teachings of their own God. The prince urges his citizens to consider the consequences if their children were kidnapped by the church, only to become tools. The prince then turns to the priest, asking if he has anything to say in his defense. The priest, overwhelmed, admits it's all true and confesses to his crimes. The prince addresses the townsfolk, asking for their input on the matter. Without hesitation, the people unanimously vote to execute the priest. The scene shifts to Spear Passy, who has just finished signing the contract and the unification memorandum. She questions the prince about the recent execution, pointing out that publicly killing a priest is essentially a declaration of war against the church. The prince firmly states that he has no regrets. Declaring war on the church was necessary because they are enemies that Border Town must defeat, no matter the cost. He just revealed the truth about the church's crimes, and he thinks he could have done better. Anyhow, now that Passy has signed the contract, the prince takes a moment to indulge in a conversation with Spear Passy about her abilities. She quickly explains that her magic involves control over other witches' powers. Specifically, she can extract magic from one witch and transfer it to others for their use. She can also extract her own magic and reclaim it. This ability is not an effect that can be seen from the outside, so she could use it any time when she was in the castle without getting suspected as a witch. The prince asks when she discovered her abilities. Spear Passy reveals that she's always known about them since awakening, though she's uncertain how much other witches understand their own powers. For her, it feels as though she gained an extra organ or a sixth sense, something innate that allows her to feel the presence of magic. The prince then asks if she remembers the proposal that Nightingale had delivered to her. Spear Passy admits she does, and she's happy to contribute her abilities to their cause. Later, the prince introduces Anna and Moon to Passy. He explains that Moon's magic is on the lower end in the Witch Union, but her rate of consumption is incredibly high. As he's mentioned before, Anna is the strongest witch in the Union, and he wants Passy to borrow Anna's magic and transfer it to Moon. Passy acknowledges that Anna may be the strongest witch, but she suggests that they should use more witches for the transfer, as a witch's magic capacity is often linked to age. She believes that even if their strength varies, everything else should be the same. However, the prince tells her that they're just conducting a test, and that they can contact others later if needed. Passy agrees and gets to work. As soon as she begins the process, she starts connecting to both of the girls. But when Passy taps into Anna's vast reservoir of magic, she is immediately overwhelmed. The sheer amount of magic is staggering, and Passy is further astonished to see the shape of the magic itself. The magic within Anna is unlike anything she's encountered before. Passy quickly begins extracting magic from Anna, but she's unsure if she can handle the immense power. Anna's magic seems resistant, like a solid piece of metal, and it doesn't look like it's going to budge at all. Just as Passy starts to feel overwhelmed, she's jolted out of the process. Nightingale offers her a hand to help her stand, and Passy, still disoriented, admits that she's never transferred magic like that before. It's too dense, and it doesn't seem like it can be cycled. She explains that once they're connected, the magic should be absorbed into the glowing ball. Anna decides to try something different. She suggests pushing her magic into the ball, similar to what she did with the divine sigil. The prince gives her permission, but warns her not to go overboard. At the mention of the divine sigil, Passy is astonished, since she has never heard of it before. Nonetheless, Anna begins to release her mana toward Passy's ball. However, the mana Anna is throwing at her is so heavy that Passy can hardly control it. It flows differently from any magic she has transferred before, and her magical tunnel starts bottlenecking with the overwhelming amount of power. Passy realizes that if she keeps this up, she'll exhaust herself before she can even transfer Anna's magic. But she continues, giving Moon all the power she can. Meanwhile, the prince instructs Moon to hold on to a giant magnet. As soon as she grabs it, Moon begins channeling all of the collected magic into the magnet to magnetize it. Passy is blown away by how relaxed Moon looks throughout the entire process. As far as she knows, Moon should be under much more pressure than herself since she is just transferring magic, but even with all the intensity, Moon remains calm and focused. No matter how many times the magic in the pivot is depleted, the magic pouring out of Anna's body refills it instantly. Passy feels as though she's facing an overwhelming tsunami, not just a girl. She believes the channel could be torn apart at any moment by the surging magic. The only word that comes to mind as she watches them work is monsters. They are so powerful that it's almost beyond comprehension. Nightingale makes sure to support Passy, helping her stay steady as the process continues. Finally, after some time, Moon is finished. She quickly rushes to the prince to hand him the magnet, but he doesn't take it directly. Instead, he avoids direct contact and holds it with a stick. Passy asks why, and the prince explains that it's a strong magnet with an ever-changing magnetic force. He's unsure if it will form a circuit with the ground and discharge all its energy through someone, so it's safer for him not to touch it directly. Of course, this explanation goes over Passy's head. Meanwhile, Anna quickly reveals the electric motor they've created. They decide to name it Dawn No. 1. Moon is excited, while Passy still looks clueless. The prince then places the magnet into this box. As soon as Moon flips the switch on the motor wheel begins rotating. The spinning wheel of the motor leaves everyone in awe. Moon excitedly asks if this means the test is a success, but the prince cautiously replies that it's too early to tell. They need to see how long it can run. Meanwhile, Passy, who doesn't understand the applications of a motor, finds it amusing that the prince is so thrilled by this ugly piece of metal, treating it like it's some kind of jewel. As the prince dives into a technical conversation with Anna, Nightingale quietly decides to leave. The nerdy talk is way over her head, and she'd rather not stick around for it. Several days pass after the motor's initial trial. Anna happily reports to the prince that the Dawn 1 motor has been running non-stop at the northern mines. It ran day and night until it finally stopped this afternoon. The prince is delighted to hear this, as it means they've discovered a new potential source of energy. While he acknowledges that its current production capacity is limited and won't be enough to spark a total revolution, it's still a promising backup to steam engines and stoves. The possibilities for the future are endless. There's a significant drawback to the motors. They drain the magic of those powering them. After charging the Dawn 1 motor, Anna, Moon, and Passy were completely exhausted. Even if all three of them charged a motor every day, they could only keep 5 motors running at most. The prince then turns to Wendy and asks if she can calculate the daily magic consumption of all members of the Witch Union and send the results to Moon. He explains that he's talking about the leftover magic after practice, missions, and emergency reserves. This data will help optimize the production of Dawn 1 motors, allowing for efficient use of the witch's power, while also providing a strengthening exercise. He believes it could be particularly beneficial as they approach each year's Awakening Day. Wendy notes that Hummingbird and Lady Echo will likely be thrilled about this development, as they'll feel just as useful as Anna in contributing to the town's progress. However, Wendy also reminds the prince that today is Lucia's Awakening Day, and suggests that everyone should take time to celebrate and stay by her side tonight. The prince apologizes sincerely, admitting that he had almost forgotten about Lucia's awakening day if Wendy hadn't reminded him. Wendy reassures him, mentioning that she has carefully recorded the history of every witch in a book so that no one will ever be overlooked. Prince then decides to prepare a feast tonight, where not only the entire witch union will be present, but he will personally join in the celebration as well. Later that day, as Lucia rests on her bed, the room is filled with warmth and chatter. All the witches are present, along with the prince. While sipping tea, the conversation drifts to how much easier surviving Awakening Day has become compared to the past, when it was a truly harrowing ordeal. Sister Scroll mentions hearing that Anna even slept through her Awakening Day. Not only did Anna handle it effortlessly, but she also achieved a high-tier ascension. Agatha marvels that if this had happened during the tequila era 400 years ago, people would have gone absolutely mad with excitement. The prince then turns to Agatha, questioning her about the work she's been handling. Agatha, with her usual nonchalance, reveals that the looming war is almost upon them, and the current workload is nothing compared to the pressure they're about to face. She adds that if they fail again, it won't matter whether she's well-rested or not. But the prince shows optimism, promising that they won't fail. But Agatha is still not sure if being confident is enough to win against demons. Wendy then quickly cuts in to remind everyone that it's not the time to be talking about gloomy things. She then turns to Lucia and asks about her wish since it's her awakening day, and she's allowed to make one wish. Lucia is fascinated by the idea of her wish being granted. Just then, her younger sister, excited and full of energy, hugs her tightly and suggests she ask for some ice cream bread. However, Lucia gives her sister a playful wink over her head. She's not planning to waste her wish on something like that, and decides to save it for something more meaningful later. The prince agrees to let her postpone the wish, but he reminds her that wishes won't accumulate over time. Right at that moment, Nightingale notices that Lucia's awakening has begun. Suddenly, Lucia winces in pain, and the other witches quickly scramble to find ways to distract her and ease the discomfort. Despite their efforts, Lucia continues to feel the sharp pain, and her vision begins to distort. Even Nightingale begins to sense something unusual happening with Lucia. Before things escalate, Passy quickly steps in. Using her power, she extracts magic from Lucia to lessen the burden of the awakening and passes the extra power to Anna, hoping that it will help stabilize the situation. Anna starts channeling all the power she's receiving into the divine sigil. A while later, we see that Lucia has finally made it through the awakening. She hugs her sister, while the other witches are shivering from the cold. The extra power Anna was getting had to be released, so she ended up obliterating part of the wall in the process. Anna also looks a bit exhausted after releasing all that magic through the sigil. She had to drill a hole into the wall to safely release the spare energy away from everyone. But the prince looks deeply concerned when he sees the huge hole in the wall. It's not that the wall is broken, it's that he's not sure how to explain that blinding beam of light that probably caught the attention of everyone in the village. That's when Nightingale gets shocked, noticing that Lucia's magic has solidified too. The next day, just as the prince feared, the first person to come to him about the light is the money manager, Old Kut Baroff. But the prince reassures him that no one was hurt, so there's nothing to worry about. He tells him to spread the word that the light everyone saw yesterday came from the fourth prince capturing lightning from the sky, as he plans to illuminate the town for his citizens. Since the prince is already building electricity infrastructure around the town, it'll be easier to explain it to the townsfolk. Soon, they'll have a new divine source of power that can light up the town like it's daytime. We then see Carl coming to meet the prince, and not just Carl, but also Kyle, Sichi, Iron Axe, and his knight. They all have one thing on their minds: the light they saw last night. Iron Axe wants to know if that was an attack by the demons, while Kyle Sichi makes a wild guess that it was from the divine sigil. Once they get the assurance they need, they promptly start to leave. Lastly, the prince's sister comes to visit him. He nearly chokes on his tea when he sees her there, and quickly starts reassuring her about what happened yesterday. But it seems like his sister already knows what happened, though she's a bit more interested in why it happened. According to Miss Agatha's explanation, antiphase pain can be avoided in both awakenings and coming-of-age events through practicing abilities and exhausting their magic. This theory matches the rough logic they worked out themselves. Slumber Island has been fine following that method, but the question remains, why was Lucia affected by antiphase? However, Lily isn't too surprised. Since coming to Border Town, she feels like she's seeing high-tier awakenings every day. The prince then states that he has a hypothesis about Lucia. It might be the key to what happened. He notes that her academic performance has improved a lot recently. Apparently, Lucia White hails from a family of merchants in Golden Wheat City, so she already had a background in literacy and mathematics. Since she also has no trouble understanding natural sciences, her academic achievements have been excellent. While Tilly doesn't doubt the prince's claim that a deeper understanding of the world can lead to evolution, She's not sure how this relates to magic antiphase. The prince then highlights that, based on his observations of Lily, Leaf, and Moon, evolution also increases a witch's magic capacity. He believes this effect is closely tied to a witch's knowledge of their environment. They're connected in the same general framework, but when it comes to situational and isolated events, magic doesn't compare to knowledge. Moon is a great example. She's a member of the Witch Union who evolved through an epiphany, but her magic is nowhere near the level of Anna or Soraya. From what Tilly understands, the prince is saying that Lucia awakened and evolved at the same time. This caused her magic to double, triple, or even increase many times over, far beyond what she could handle. The prince acknowledges this, but adds that he doesn't think awakening and evolving are the same thing. Increases in magic capacity are generally categorized into 3 types: awakening day, coming of age, and evolving. While they may seem similar in their effects, he believes the first 2 are mandatory stages, whereas evolving is self-motivated. He points out that antiphase isn't present during evolving. If awakening and evolving were the same, Anna's rapid growth in magic would have killed her when she evolved. The prince hypothesizes that witches have a danger line for their magic capacity. When they exceed this limit, their bodies are plunged into extreme pain. However, with daily practice, this line can slowly be raised. That's also why witches are advised to deplete all their magic before awakening day, to prevent overwhelming their bodies with excess magic. In simpler terms, the prince believes that Lucia's magic increased far too much, and her overwhelming magic went past the danger line, causing the accident. He further explains that Anna might have suffered just like Lucia, but her magic capacity was already enormous. Because of this, her danger line was much higher than the average witch's. This also explains why Lucia returned to normal after Passy absorbed some of the violent magic. It never really belonged to Lucia in the first place. Tilly is amazed by all the hypotheses the prince has to offer. They explain a lot of things. She then asks him why magic can appear in so many different ways when it all comes from the same source, and why witches can only see the magic in the world once they awaken. The prince responds that magic only truly belongs to a witch once they accept it. Awakening can be seen as drawing magic to oneself, but ultimately keeping only a small portion, while evolution is about expanding that small portion. The more knowledge a witch has, the stronger they become when they evolve. This also makes sense because there's no limit to evolution. There's no end to learning more about the world. Suddenly, the princess gets curious and wonders how powerful the prince would be if he were a witch, given all the knowledge he has. But the prince quickly shakes off that thought. He really wants to personally experience what transcendence feels like, but he'd rather avoid paying the price. Princess Tilly then requests him if he can give her permission to bring some of his curriculum back to Slumber Island with her. The prince agrees to her right away, as it will be beneficial for him if the witches on the Slumber Island evolve as well. Besides, she is sister, so he possibly can't say no. This remark leaves her embarrassed, and an awkward silence falls over the room. She doesn't say anything afterward and quietly decides to leave. On the other hand, the prince regrets what he said. He realizes that he probably overstepped his boundaries. He doesn't think she'd be interested in him saying that, especially since she hasn't fully trusted him yet. But just before she leaves the room, Tilly turns to him and admits that she would have been more glad if he were not her real brother. Later, as the prince sits alone in his office, he keeps replaying the phrase in his mind Tilly had said. While he's spaced out, Nightingale suddenly appears in the room. Prince wants to know if Nightingale understood what Tilly meant by those words, to which Nightingale says she surely has no clue. The prince definitely doesn't want to interpret this the wrong way. After spending time with her this winter, he has a better understanding of her personality. He wonders if Tilly might be saying she doesn't want the fourth prince to return, or maybe she was commenting on how he pulled her into their relationship. Nightingale then points out that since he's not her actual brother, he shouldn't be worrying too much about it. Not to mention, she didn't need any powers to tell that he was lying. I mean, since he is not her real brother, why would he be comfortable giving his Natural Science 101 lesson? The prince gets embarrassed, but quickly clarifies that since this winter will last a few more months, making a copy of his book won't hurt him. Besides, he is 100% sure that his sister has practically memorized its contents already. But still, she made a formal request to test his attitude. Since Slumber Island is made up of witches, they'll continue to solely rely on magic, whether they evolve or not. But he proudly claims that he is different. This knowledge can bring both witches and mortals to greater heights, because he relies on everything, not just magic. Later we find ourselves outside, where poor Lucia has just made her way into the facility. Anna is there too, and she makes sure to warm the poor girl up. Afterwards, Lucia looks at the table and notices various parts scattered around, then asks Anna what she's making. Anna explains that some parts are for new firearms, and the prince said he hasn't succeeded yet, so he'll need more testing. She then asks about the prince, and Lucia says he had some other business to take care of, so he'll be late. He will surely come since he also wants to get familiar with her new abilities. Anna is just glad to see that Lucia is making progress too. She promptly hands Lucia a metal piece and tells her to demonstrate her new abilities. Lucia grabs the metal piece, and as soon as she activates her magic, she finds her consciousness somewhere else entirely. She sees a lot of different colors on the surface of the metal she's holding. She's sure these aren't the tiny atomic particles the prince was talking about. These squares and spots are far too big to be those. Anna reminds Lucia that there's a larger category above atoms, known as elements. Lucia agrees, and explains that she read about how atoms form larger clusters based on different combinations, and the properties of those clusters depend on their structures. Judging from the prince's descriptions and categorizations, she's confident that's what she's seeing. Anna seems to finally understand. Based on her own knowledge, she suggests that this might be a branching ability, a rare talent among matured witches. Anna recalls Agatha mentioning that such rare abilities only appear during a witch's maturity day, and they're closely related to the witch's main ability, possibly enhancing or balancing it. So in the same way, since Lucia's main ability is disintegration and restoration, these color blocks might be a guide for her to dissect specific elements. She then encourages Lucia to try extracting a single element. As soon as Lucia begins, a light starts to illuminate. She successfully extracts another material from the metal, though the process is exhausting, and she takes a rest. Meanwhile, Anna inspects the result. She realizes it might be a new alloy formed from raw iron and other elements, though she isn't certain. However, she decides she can run a small experiment to confirm it. She hypothesizes that Lucia can extract specific elements from a whole object. However, the remaining elements don't just fall apart, they rearrange themselves according to certain rules when they lose those elements. If this is true, Anna is convinced that even every useless byproduct can be reproduced in Lucia's hands. The scene transitions to a black boat sailing across the sea. The boat captain inquires about the type of business the onboard merchant intends to conduct in the western region. He warns that the area once produced jewelry and furs, but such industries have long since disappeared. The merchant speculates whether the population there might have turned to banditry, but the captain dismisses the idea as outdated. Ever since the fourth prince took over Border Town, the western region has been really strange. No one knows what he's doing there all day. Still, any merchant traveling there seems to do well, whether it's food, clothing, or anything else. Everything sells. Hearing this, the merchant hopes he won't return empty-handed. However, even if he does, he doesn't mind much. After all, the main purpose of his trip is just to meet the leader of Border Town, Roland Wimbledon. His identity as a rebel makes it inconvenient for him to travel openly as an ambassador. To circumvent this gentleman, who goes by the name Otto, disguises himself as a merchant. The disguise, however, comes with its own challenges. Otto must abandon his expensive attire, blend in with the crew, and endure the cramped quarters below deck, sharing the same utensils and living conditions as the sailors. Before embarking on his journey, Otto sought information about Border Town by questioning local informants. From them, he learned that, on paper, the king would have to harbor deep animosity toward Prince Roland Wimbledon to assign him to a place as desolate as the western region. This theory aligns with Roland's tarnished reputation. However, the reality presents a stark contrast. Despite all of the shit and warfare that followed the former king's royal decree, Roland has secured an unshakable grip over the western region, and now poses a significant threat to the new king. Among the common folk, some claim that Roland has fallen to the devils, others say he actively recruits witches. Yet for Otto, neither of these allegations matter, so long as Roland holds a grudge against the church. In that regard, Roland is far more palatable to the Kingdom of Dawn than Timothy. As soon as the ship reaches the shore, Otto is utterly baffled by the sight before him. He can hardly believe his eyes, questioning if he has indeed landed at Border Town's piers. The structures before him dwarf even the piers of Grey Castle's capital, which are only half as large. Furthermore, the enormous ships docked there seem far too massive for traditional rowing. The sight is nothing short of extraordinary. Beyond that, Otto notices organized cargo checkers at work and discovers that there are no toll fees, a concept that seems entirely absurd to him. As the carriage makes its way through the bustling marketplace of Border Town, Otto's astonishment only grows. Among the stalls, he notices peculiar products that he has never encountered, not even in the Kingdom of Dawn. While Otto marvels at the market's unique offerings, the scene shifts to Ash and Andrea walking through the same marketplace. Andrea appears indifferent to her surroundings and pays no attention to Otto. However, Otto immediately recognizes Andrea and calls out to her. Hearing her name, Andrea turns around and, upon seeing him, recognizes him just as quickly. Later, the group heads to a nearby motel to catch up. Otto is overwhelmed to meet Andrea again, having believed for years that she was dead. While they talk, Otto notices Ash and inquires about her. Ash promptly introduces herself and, with curiosity, asks Otto how he knows Andrea. The man formally introduces himself as Otto Lux from the Kingdom of Dawn, explaining that he has known Andrea since childhood. He reveals that his sister Belinda, a member of the Toccata family, and the Prince of Dawn, His Highness Appen Moya, were all close friends with Andrea. Upon hearing these notable names, Ash quickly recognizes that Otto must belong to a privileged class, and asks why he had assumed Andrea was dead. Before Otto can respond, Andrea interrupts. She firmly states that Belinda and Oro were correct. The young lady of the Quinn family is, in fact, dead. Otto is left bewildered, unable to comprehend why Andrea would say such a thing. To understand her statement, it is crucial to know the context. In the city of Glow, the top 3 noble families, Toccata, Quinn, and Lux, were considered the king's most trusted partners. For generations, these families held key ministerial positions in the royal court, shaping the kingdom's governance and legacy. The Quinn family's daughter, Andrea, was renowned for both her beauty and her prestigious background, making her the object of many suitors. Otto and Oro were no exception, each vying for her attention in their own way. But everyone was taken by surprise when Andrea's horse-drawn carriage lost control and tumbled down the mountain during a spring vacation. After a long and arduous search, they finally found her broken and battered corpse. However, Andrea quickly interrupts, revealing that it wasn't an accident. She then promptly discloses what happened 5 years ago. Apparently, the carriage accident was orchestrated by the Quinn family. Her father had discovered her identity as a witch, and once he learned the truth, he immediately arranged the staged accident to fake her death and smuggle her out of the kingdom. Eventually, Andrea settled in the northern region of Grey Castle, where she met Tilly. After hearing the truth, Otto reflects that the accident may have been for her own good, as it ensured her safety, given that the church was actively hunting witches. But Andrea does not share this view. She is annoyed that her father never bothered to ask her opinion. He didn't care about her feelings. His only concern was to dispose of her as quickly as possible. With that, Andrea decides to leave. After all, the Quinn family's young lady died 5 years ago, and she no longer knows anyone named Otto. However, Otto reminds her that Oro still places flowers on her tombstone every year, as he is unable to forget her. But for Andrea, this is simply emotional baggage. She believes that Oro will eventually move on, just as she has. Despite this, Otto doesn't want her to leave just like that. The scene then transitions to Bordertown Castle, where Anna reveals to the prince that Tilly's 20th birthday is approaching. She asks the prince what he plans to gift her. Unsurprisingly, the prince doesn't even remember that Tilly's birthday is coming up. The fourth prince's memories are mostly filled with mischief, and he has never bothered to retain any memories of such occasions. You see, Tilly represents a dark period in the fourth prince's history, and anything related to her is buried deep in his memories. This is likely because she was the youngest child, and the king always held grand ceremonies for her birthday when he was alive. Even Timothy, who was spoiled the most, did not have that luxury. When Tilly came of age, all 4 regional leaders rushed to the capital to honor her. She even received gifts from Dawn Wolfheart and Eternal Winter. Timothy and Garcia were envious and wanted to teach her a lesson. Of course, the fourth prince was too cowardly to participate with his older siblings in this mischief, so he has no real memory of what happened. In the end, the older siblings poisoned the bear, and it died. Ironically, it was her favorite gift. Since he has no memories of her, the prince isn't sure how to approach the situation. But there is one thing on his mind. He decides to draw a bear and hopes to use Anna's abilities to pull off the gift he wants to give her. When the day of Tilly's birthday arrives, the prince shows up at her room with a giant gift box in his hands. Not only that, but he is also preparing to host a grand feast for her birthday celebration. Tilly is quite bewildered by this gift, as Roland has never given her anything before. He admits this is true, but quickly reminds her that he once gave her a goose feather quill. Regardless, he urges her to unwrap the gift. As soon as she does, she finds a cute panda inside. For some reason, she calls it a bear, so for the sake of it, we'll call it a bear too. Tilly gives the toy a hug, sinking into its softness and feeling incredibly cozy. If you want to know the story behind this creation, here it is. The fur of the toy was crafted by Soraya, and its canvas was made from a wolf cub's hide from the north. It is incredibly soft, and the design was entirely inspired by pandas from the prince's past life. You see, pandas are an ancient creature that has survived solely due to their cuteness. They are a common, universally beloved gift, and their charm is unparalleled. Well, it indeed looks like a panda, but since Tilly has never seen one, she assumes it's just a bear with unusual colors. The prince asks her if she finds it ugly, to which she quickly replies no. The prince then reveals that it's called a panda and is very popular. Tilly curiously asks if it's from another world. The prince agrees and explains that it's more than just a huggable plush. He urges her to pinch its neck. As soon as Tilly does, the panda activates. Its limbs begins to move, and she falls flat to the ground. The prince swiftly deactivates the panda and apologizes, explaining that he implanted an electric motor and gears inside to power its movements. He further elaborates that the motors inside are miniature versions of the Dawn 1 motor. Even if Tilly doesn't use it frequently, the panda can continue moving for 3 to 4 months on its current setup. He adds that the toy will stop moving once she pinches its neck again, making it perfect for her to take back to Sleeping Island. Although Tilly is fond of the gift, she can't help but ask why he would give her something like this. The prince responds with a question of his own, asking if she remembers what happened when she came of age. Tilly quickly remembers the incident and questions her brother if he poisoned her bear. The prince reassures her, saying it wasn't him, but rather Timothy and Garcia who were responsible. He admits, however, that he also bears some responsibility. If he had reported their mischief to his father earlier, it might never have happened. As the two siblings are catching up, a knock sounds at the door. Before opening it, the prince wishes Tilly a happy birthday and encourages her to put aside any unpleasant memories. This gesture leaves Tilly feeling slightly flustered. Meanwhile, on the other side of the door, Andrea and Ash are butting heads, each arguing about who arrived first to greet Tilly for her birthday. When the prince opens the door, he interrupts their bickering by breaking it down to them that he is the first to arrive, which naturally deflates both of the girls' moods. We then switch back to Otto, who is sinking into despair somewhere in the town. He's visibly upset by how Andrea dismissed their feelings, calling them nothing more than emotional baggage. It's been 2 days since their last encounter, and Otto has walked through every corner of the town in search of her. He even spent the rest of the day wandering around the market, hoping to catch another glimpse of her, but to no avail. Despite his search, Otto hasn't forgotten his original purpose. While looking for Andrea, he's also been observing the miracles created by the prince. The black machines in the mines, towering metal structures by the Redwater River, and the canals that seem to flow everywhere. The entire town is incredible, and Otto can only record as much as he can for now, planning to pore over the details later. Suddenly, someone approaches Otto and questions whether he's a merchant. The dejected man is clearly not in the mood to respond, but the knight sternly states that they've received reports suggesting he might be a spy. They request that he put his hands behind his back and follow their instructions. He's warned that if he resists, they cannot guarantee his safety. When Otto reveals his true identity as an aristocrat from the Kingdom of Dawn, it's already too late for him. He receives a hard punch to the gut. However, the knights don't continue the beating after hearing the mention of his noble status. Still, they kick him again for resisting. Desperately, Otto tries to explain that he is indeed an aristocrat, and he is willing to show the documents he has in his bag. The knights, gritting their teeth, know that only the prince will hear his explanation now. If Otto reveals everything, there's a chance he might get out of this alive. Well, it was a rough experience, but at least Otto finally ended up in front of the prince. When the prince takes a look at the notes Otto had been preparing about Border Town, even he finds them unusual. It's not surprising that Otto was misunderstood, as many citizens didn't know where he came from, and it was his order to report anything out of the ordinary. The prince admits that Otto's arrest was rougher than it should have been, but emphasizes that most criminals immediately retaliate with weapons. Since the start of winter, 2 police officers have been injured in Border Town, and they were all Timothy's spies. While Otto understands the need for security and stability, he raises a valid point. This approach might hurt innocent travelers. Most people, unlike him, may not be able to produce documentation to prove their identity. The prince reminds him that he need not worry about that. He explains that the Justice Department's verifications have nothing to do with documents, and he has many methods to ensure the safety of innocents. It's the best of both worlds. Otto then goes on to explain that while passing through the capital, he overheard rumors among the merchants that Prince Roland is planning to overthrow Timothy. The prince stresses that Timothy should never have come to power. He killed their father, executed the first prince, and kicked the third princess out of the Grey Castle. The entire southern region is now devastated by warfare, and refugees are scattered everywhere. These are all Timothy's crimes. Only his departure will restore Grey Castle's brilliance. Otto can see the determination in Prince Roland, a drive to actually make a difference, something he never saw in Timothy. Otto then addresses the prince, stating that as a friendly neighbor, the Kingdom of Dawn wishes for Grey Castle to regain stability as soon as possible. He has come to deliver a request for an alliance from the King of Dawn. He didn't bring an official letter, fearing it might be leaked, but his king has granted him full authority on this matter. If their kingdoms can unite and become the 2 horns pushing back the church's assault, they will avoid the fate suffered by Eternal Winter and Wolfheart. But the prince points out that this plan doesn't seem very useful. The church's determination to swallow all 4 kingdoms is far stronger than Otto realizes. The prince begins to believe that Otto doesn't fully understand their ambition. However, he's willing to share everything he's gathered about the church, hoping that Otto can bring this information back so his king can reconsider the alliance. Defeating the church will require retaliation at full power, not just overwhelming intimidation. Shortly after, once the prince has finished revealing everything from A to Z about the divine warriors, pure witches and devils, Otto looks absolutely boggled. The amount of information he's just received is overwhelming, and he just wants to report it all to his king as soon as possible. The prince reminds him that this information is closely tied to the life and death of both kingdoms, so it's incredibly important. He further stresses that they don't have a lot of time. The scene then shifts to Andrea, where Xavi reports that Otto is about to set sail soon. She suggests that Andrea should at least send him off, considering he's her childhood friend. But Andrea refuses to meet him. This also triggers a memory when Princess once asked her if she wouldn't meet Otto, as it seemed like he cared about her. As the chill breeze continues to make Xavi shiver, they notice that the boat is about to sail off. Although Andrea is visibly upset to see him go, she still believes it's for the best. She is sure that both Otto and Oro will find more suitable women through their families, and she believes her relationship with them was destined to end. With that, she silently says goodbye to him without meeting him for the last time. Later, the prince walks into the facility where Anna is experimenting. He's finally here to see how much progress Lucia has made with her abilities. While Anna warms his hands, she reminds him that she's already successfully fractured new gun barrels and interlocking mechanisms based on his blueprints. However, she thinks some of the designs could still be improved, particularly one part. Prince expresses his appreciation for her hard work, genuinely pleased with her results. He's especially happy that despite only providing theoretical blueprints for the firearms, the practical application Anna has implemented has turned out so well. It's natural to have imperfections in such designs. Moreover, Anna's talent and analytical skills far exceed his own. He believes that one day, her work will surpass his own achievements. Anna then bows her head, hoping for a pat on the head, and the prince fulfills her request with a smile. Next, Lucia reports her progress. She explains that it will take her longer to work with the steel alloy, as there are simply too many elements to separate. As the prince reads her notes, he's pleased to learn that the superior steel she created by controlling its purity and carbon content is only the beginning. With the various elements now at their disposal from the northern mines, he knows the work ahead will be difficult, but he's willing to try whatever it takes. He then asks to see the tests Lucia conducted, and she promptly presents them. I have already dragged this part out a bit, so let's summarize the next part. Agatha is also working on her project. She's in the process of creating nitrogen, while Soraya's task is to make containers to seal it. With all these components, the prince is planning to eventually create a light bulb. It's the dead of night, and everyone has gathered outside in the courtyard, yet no one seems to have any clue what the prince is planning. Wild guesses float through the air as the crowd murmurs in confusion. Then, with a single press of a button, the prince debunks all the wild guesses when the bulb lights up to life. The sudden brightness is blinding, and even lightning has to shield her eyes from the sharp glare. The crowd gasps in awe, and the prince explains to everyone that this is a light bulb. Unlike candles, it won't be extinguished by the wind, and unlike bonfires, it requires no maintenance. From this day forward, the entire town will have access to lights like this. Anna then announces Sister Moon is the true hero of the hour. It is thanks to her efforts that they are able to see light in the night. Some days pass, and the town is bustling with activity despite the harsh winter. The townsfolk are busy clearing snow from the roads, and life seems to move forward smoothly. However, beneath the surface, shady dealings take place as goods are exchanged illegally in secret corners of the marketplace. In the middle of one such illicit transaction, the town's officers raid the scene. One of the shady businessmen is quickly captured, but the other attempts to flee with his goods. His escape is short-lived, however, as he stumbles upon Wade, who promptly arrests him. Later, the two men are brought before the prince. With a cold, commanding tone, the prince demands they reveal their schemes. He warns them that any attempt to lie will result in harsher punishments. The bald man is the first to speak. Nervously, he admits that he had taken some wheat he purchased from the city hall and ground it into rough flour. He then mixed it with wild vegetables and baked it into bread to sell at the market. He insists that he was trying to stay within the law, as the prince had allowed the sale of foodstuffs other than staples. It was a small business that earned him a few silvers each month, just enough to get by without starving. The older man further explains that he couldn't afford to spare any more grains, so he sought out farmers who hadn't sold all of their produce to the city hall. Desperation drove him to buy directly from them, skirting the centralized distribution system. The guy with the yellow head quickly admits to his crime as well. He confesses that he sold grains illegally because he had no other choice. He claims that the city hall officials refused to purchase all of the wheat as promised, leaving farmers with surplus grain and no income. Selling the excess was the only way he could survive. This seems like a serious matter for the prince. Despite the repeated warnings about the illegality of privately selling staple food, some people still take the risk for extra money. However, the prince is more concerned with the city hall officials not buying up all his crops. To address the issue, the prince directly questions the city hall representative, asking if they refuse to buy the crops. The representative respectfully explains that City Hall didn't stop purchasing after the harvest, but prices were adjusted based on the quality of the wheat. At first, the price was nearly identical to the old rate. But when winter set in, most farmers didn't have proper storage facilities and were living in temporary shelters. As a result, the quality of the wheat they had plummeted, often becoming moldy, so the price had to be reduced. Most of the grain City Hall received was either wet or moldy, making it impossible to store further. As a result, City Hall halved the price. Yellowhead's face goes pale. In a panic, he tries to justify himself, claiming that getting half the price is basically the same as getting nothing. He complains that he worked all year only to receive such a low rate. To him, the situation felt worse than dealing with the black market. As far as he can tell, prices were supposed to be fixed and stable. That's when Old Man Barov steps in, sternly scolding the farmer. He points out that the farmer would have received the full price if he had sold the wheat on time. Barov accuses him of hoarding and asks if he really thought City Hall wouldn't notice his scheme. Barov explains that hoarders like him gamble on the town's food supply running low so they can sell their stock at 3 or 4 times the price. Now that the prince has heard both sides, he declares both of these guys guilty. The farmer, Soya, privately sold crops with malicious intent, so he'll be sentenced to 10 years in the mines. If he shows good behavior, the punishment could be reduced. As for this bald citizen who was also involved in the crime and used subpar grains to bake bread and sell it, he'll face 10 years of labor and a fine 3 times the profit he made from selling the bread. This will take effect immediately. The prince then addresses Sirius, the City Hall representative, and instructs him to turn this into an announcement, pin it on the bulletin board. The prince wants all citizens to know every detail to prevent something like this from happening again. Finally, the prince turns to his knight and asks if it's true that Wade was the one who caught them. The knight confirms this, but explains that Wade went a little overboard. He pursued them without his uniform, and a passerby reported him for assault while the suspects were being transported. Knight Carter mentions that he's planning to reprimand Wade later. The prince reminds his knight that reprimanding Wade is unnecessary. In fact, he believes Wade deserves recognition for his actions. Wade had been operating as a plainclothes officer this time, which explains how he was fully aware of who the criminals were and how to reach them. Given his past experience as a patrol guard, Wade's familiarity with the streets and his natural aptitude for detective work made his approach effective. The prince is already considering inviting Wade to join the public security department in the future. Nightingale could use an extra hand, and Wade's skills would be a valuable addition. The scene then transitions to the deep tunnels of Hermes, where Archbishop Tayfun is accompanied by a witch. It is Tayfun's first time in these depths, and he wonders if the Pope truly intended for him to be here. The witch reassures him, reflecting on Tayfun's tireless work for the church and suggesting that the Pope must place complete trust in him. She explains that the rules of the past are no longer suitable for the war that lies ahead. The will of God, she believes, should no longer be reserved for a select few, but must inspire every believer, preparing them for the final challenge. Typhoon, however, finds himself concerned about the adjustment of the 2 newly appointed archbishops. It had already taken them a long time to accept the existence of pure witches. The 2 guys he is talking about are Solidaire, a member of the Divine Punishment Army, and Edward, from the Justice Court. The witch explains that if it weren't for pure witches, who else would be able to carry out black operations for the archbishops? She continues, suggesting that, besides their usefulness in such tasks, witches can also offer other forms of relief, whether it's through intimacy, releasing anger, or satisfying different desires. The feeling of a witch, she claims, cannot be compared to that of a mortal woman. Tayfun gets uncomfortable with her words, and quickly tells her to stop making such jokes, especially to someone his age, who already has 1 foot in the grave. Finally, they reach the dead end of the chamber, where a witch with a veil over her face awaits. She informs them that the Pope is currently experimenting with magic stones. She warns that if they are carrying any stones of divine judgment, they must hand them over, as they could interfere with the magic inside. Reluctantly, Tayfun hands over his stone of divine judgment. The gate leading to Pope finally opens. As soon as he steps inside, he meets Maine, or rather, he meets Zero, who is impersonating Maine. The fake Maine quickly tells Tayfun to make himself comfortable, but the old man refuses. He insists on maintaining formality, as he is bound by the church's rules. However, Maine reminds him that he is giving the order. Reluctantly, Tayfun finally sits across from Maine, the 2 men facing each other. Tayfun reports that he has captured 3 witches, as Maine had ordered the capture of any witches. However, during the extraction of one of them, she managed to escape and killed the entire squad in the process. Since then, no one has been able to track her down. Because of this, they've lost 16 followers to this witch, 4 of whom were in training to become divine punishment soldiers. Taefun warns that if this happens again, the members of their order will begin to fear participating in such operations. Main reminds his old junior that combat witches are rare, and most of the fallen witches lack the power to resist. He assures Taefun that incidents like the recent one are unlikely to occur frequently. He explains that every fallen witch represents the potential creation of 2 divine punishment soldiers, which are desperately needed. The pressure on the Hermes perimeter increases every day, and the church urgently requires more soldiers to defend against the demons. Taefun is surprised by the logical and pragmatic demeanor Main is displaying, noting how much more mature he seems since his inauguration as Pope. Shifting the focus, Taefun shares some good news. Most of Wolfheart and Arista now support the church, excluding a few resistant cities. Eternal Winter, as expected, remains as weak and uncooperative as ever. Taefun reports that the Holy City's resources are projected to double by next summer, along with a significant increase in the size of the Divine Punishment Army. He also notes that the Kingdom of Dawn is facing riots, sparked by the royal court's crackdown on church followers. Despite the pressure from their aristocrats, Taefun is confident the church's supporters in the kingdom can hold out until the end of winter. Main is pleased with this report and announces plans to adjust next year's priorities. Grey Castle will take precedence, while the Kingdom of Dawn will be deprioritized and addressed last. But Taefun reminds his senior that the church's resources are currently focused on the Kingdom of Dawn. Shifting their efforts to Grey Castle would require significant effort and time to reorganize. Main, however, counters by stating that Grey Castle is already in ruins. The royal decree for the throne and the distribution of berserker pills have fulfilled their purpose, plunging Grey Castle into chaos. In contrast, the turmoil within the Kingdom of Dawn is internal, driven by their own instability. It is only a matter of time before they destroy themselves, so the order of their priorities is less critical. What concerns Maine the most is the western region's Roland Wimbledon. Over the past year, Maine has gathered detailed reports and uncovered something alarming. Apparently, every operation against Roland, whether orchestrated by the church or by Timothy, has failed. Individually, these failures might not seem significant, but when viewed together, the pattern is deeply concerning. Roland Wimbledon has not lost a single battle. His victories stem from his rapid growth, both in military power and influence, and he is continually expanding his reach. Maine warns that if given another year, Roland might secure control over the entire kingdom of Grey Castle. By that point, reclaiming the land would become far more difficult and costly for the church. There is too much to be done in Hermes, and Maine doesn't have the time to concern himself with the church's internal planning and maintenance. He decides to leave those responsibilities to Taefun. After the brief meeting, the witches escort Maine out. Once he is out of earshot, the fake Maine calls over a witch named Black Veil and praises her for how much stronger her illusions have become. As Maine transforms back into her true form, it is of course Zero. Black Veil accepts Zero's gratitude with utmost respect. At this moment, Isabella, a blonde witch, joins the conversation. She remarks that Roland Wimbledon, the fourth prince, seems like an intriguing guy, and might even have a better chance of defeating the devils than the church does. Black Veil immediately questions Isabella if she is considering betraying the church. Isabella calmly dismisses the accusation, because betrayal sounds ugly to her. She explains that the church's ultimate purpose is to ensure humanity's survival through the divine war. If someone else can achieve that, she doesn't mind who it is. Zero quickly silences them both. She acknowledges Isabella's argument, but stresses that the divine war is about more than survival. It is about becoming God's chosen child. To earn God's smile, Zero declares that she must win this war herself. The scene transitions to this bearded old man of the Eltec family, whom I forgot the name of, but he is father of Furlan, and he claims to be a descendant of Agatha. He questions his son, Miso, about where he is headed while wearing armor. Miso confidently replies that he is going to join Lord Mead EE in his campaign to earn glory and secure territory. He explains that Lord Mead E has gathered most of the western region's aristocrats at his castle, where he presented King Timothy's decree. The decree promises an increase in both status and land to anyone who aids in taking down Longsong Fortress. Miso lists several notable families who have already pledged their support without hesitation. The first is Lady Millicent of the Wild Rose family, the second is Lord Cavan of the Maple family, and lastly, Lord Manoa of the Leaping Wolf family. The fool of a son assures his father that he will prove himself to be better than his brothers by bringing glory to their family. However, his father quickly reminds him of Duke Ryan's crushing defeat. But Miso seems indifferent, and confidently states that this time is different. Timothy has provided them with snow powder, a weapon just as powerful as the one used by the fourth prince. He also mentions hearing rumors that Lord Mead E has something even stronger in reserve. Miso declares that the battle will begin soon. With that, the fool of a son departs, hoping to bring glory to his family, unlike his brother Furlan, who is now a puppet of the fourth prince. The father can't help but feel disappointment. No matter how strong Timothy or his armies may be, they're no match for Roland. The old bearded man learned this firsthand when he met Prince Roland recently. Roland is an intelligent and compassionate leader, unlike the rest. The old man reflects on his own family, Ferlin, Eileen, and Lady Agatha, all of whom live in Border Town. He orders his butler to leave for Border Town immediately and report this news to the prince. He doesn't care how the butler gets there, he just wants the message delivered as soon as possible. A few days later, we meet an angry Roland, who has just received a distressing message from Ambassador Petrov, who is currently stationed at Longsong Fortress. Apparently, the 4 families of the western region have rebelled, and Roland isn't sure who is backing them up. Knight Carter explains that these families must have been planning this for a long time. The aristocrats likely have a new patron or leader, one who has united them for the first time. Iron Axe suggests that it must be Timothy backing the rebellion, but Prince Roland is also certain that it wouldn't be surprising if the church is involved instead. Looking at the Dragon Cliffs, Roland notes that an attack on the western region is only a matter of time. Carter explains that, according to the letter they received, the enemy seems to have significant firepower. Roland points out that both the church and Timothy are not strangers to snow powder, but it will still take time before it becomes practical for them. Roland is confused. Even if they have a powerful patron, there's still the issue of distance. Border Town is the closest to Longsong Fortress, so why would they think they can defeat the First Army? Nightingale also adds her 2 cents, suggesting that the enemy's confidence likely stems from the ongoing demon months and the major roads being shut down due to the weather. They're still facing constant demon attacks, and to them, this chaos is the best guarantee for success. Prince Roland commands Iron Axe to mobilize the First Army, taking 500 soldiers and leaving tomorrow morning immediately. He orders Iron Axe to bring 6 cannons, and gives him full discretion to make further plans as he sees fit. He then instructs Carter to stay behind and defend Border Town. Naturally, this suggestion doesn't sit well with Carter, but Roland reminds him that the demons are a bigger threat than the aristocrats. He needs Carter to hold the town while he's away. This time, Roland plans to bring the witches with him. Nightingale quickly pledges to go anywhere he leads. Roland explains that his original plan was to expand slowly, gradually absorbing the elite territories. But the rebellion has given him an opportunity to seize land and labor beyond the fortress, and this time he won't be lenient. The scene cuts to the butler of the Eltec family, who instructs the boatman to take him to Border Town, promising a handsome reward from the Eltec family. However, the boatman simply replies that it's not about the money. His boat is just a simple hull with no roof to block out the snow. In these temperatures, it will take him several days to reach Border Town, as they will freeze in the boat long before they arrive. The butler asks if there is anyone who can take him instead. The boatman clarifies that only a large sailboat from the fortress is capable of handling such a journey. Just as the butler begins to despair, a giant boat looms in the distance, followed by a whole fleet of ships, all led by Prince Roland himself, making his way to Longsong Fortress. Lightning appears and reports to the prince that the enemy is mainly concentrated in the ruler's castle. There are still some guards fighting, but they can't hold out for much longer. She reports that there are around 200 enemies, and the first wall has already been lost. The enemy seems to have something similar to muskets, but they are completely different from their own. She also informs the prince that Ambassador Petrov is frightened because his family was attacked, and he quickly pulls his father into the castle for safety. However, the rest of his family is gone. The duke's wife and the rest were captured and killed to force his surrender. Lightning had assured Petrov that the prince is on his way, but Petrov made only one request. When the prince asks what the request is, Lightning replies that Petrov wants to make the enemy pay with blood. The prince is unsettled to hear this. The aristocrats have an unspoken rule never to harm a duke or someone of higher rank. But now, the 4 rebelling families seem to have shattered that pride. It must be because of the Honeysucker family's support for him, along with orders from their patron. Prince Roland instructs Lightning to relay his orders. Aside from the witches who will be fighting at the walls, everyone else will rush directly into the city and seize the piers. While the soldiers at the fortress are doing their best to fend off the enemy, the invaders continue to infiltrate the walls. Longsong Fortress soldiers try to shoot their bullets, but the enemy soldiers are equipped with bulletproof shields, and the poor soldier is quickly overwhelmed and defeated. Just when it seems like they're done for, someone crashes through the enemy ranks like a meteor, and it's none other than Maggie and Ash, ready to lend a hand to the struggling soldiers. The soldiers, still terrified by the sight of the witches, are taken aback. Maggie notices the injured soldiers and immediately takes one to Nana for healing. The soldier on the ground, still in disbelief, wonders if this witch is really here to save them. Ash responds positively, stating that she's here under Prince Roland Wimbledon's orders. The soldiers remain stunned, still processing the fact that it would have taken at least 3 days for them to get here from Border Town. How did the prince know the aristocrats were attacking? Ash, however, states that she doesn't have time to answer his question. In front of her are the enemy soldiers, and she's itching to obliterate them. The enemy soldiers laugh, amused by the sight of a woman defending the wall. But their laughter is quickly silenced when Ash swings her heavy blade and cleaves through several soldiers in a single swing, taking their heads with it. The soldiers watch in absolute awe as Ash continues to obliterate the invaders, cutting them down left and right. Once the area is cleared, Ash orders one of the surviving soldiers to gather the rest of his comrades at the wall, assuring him that someone will pick them up later. With that, Ash leaps off the giant wall, crashing down on the soldiers below, sending them scattering like matchsticks. As soon as she starts swinging her sword, it's clear that the soldiers' fate is sealed. Meanwhile, Jacques Meade, who is leading the rebellion, is fascinated that the Honeysuckle family has retreated to the topmost floor of the fortress. Despite being under constant attack for a full day, they're still holding out. He's confident, however, that Petrov will eventually have to give up. After all, how long could he keep avoiding starvation? Jacques Meade reflects on the secret letter from Timothy, which mentioned that if they can capture Longsong Fortress, the royal army will join them and destroy the traitorous King Roland. Once the snow melts, the western regions would be left for him to manage once Roland is defeated. One of his knights reports the state of the battle and asks if they should switch to phalanxes. Of course, Jacques Meade quickly gives the green light. He's sure that the small muskets Longsong Fortress is using will be useless against Timothy's phalanx. Jacques Meade imagines how satisfying it will be to send Petrov's head to Roland, but it looks like his dreams are going to be just dreams at the end. Another subordinate reports to Jacques Meade that something strange is happening at the West Piers. He claims to have heard chugging noises, and when he sent 2 teams to investigate, neither has returned. Jacques Meade, still as arrogant and blinded by his misplaced confidence, dismisses the report with a mocking tone. He asks if it's not just some hobo snoring or something. But his subordinate tells Jacques Meade that only a titan as tall as a wall could snore that loudly, making it clear he's not joking. Meanwhile, at the piers, one of the soldiers looks around with the fire torch in his hands. He can't see anyone around, and worst of all is that the entire area has plunged into darkness with no torches burning. But soon enough, the air is filled with the sounds of bullets, and enemy soldiers drop like flies. Leading the charge is none other than Prince Roland Wimbledon, and his face is a mask of pure fury. When one of the soldiers returns to Jacques Meade to report what's happening at the piers, the poor man is stomped on by Jacques Meade in a fit of rage. The stubborn leader refuses to take the situation seriously. He dismisses the idea that the Prince Roland is marching with thousands of soldiers. The soldier tries his best to convince Jacques Meade, explaining that Duke Rampart's men were hit by a relentless barrage of gunfire. He points out that the darkness was filled with countless sparks, and the shooting didn't stop for even a second. Jacques Meade asks where Duke Rampart is and what happened to the Wild Rose and Leaping Wolf families. He demands they be brought here immediately. But then, the soldier delivers more bad news that those families have already retreated from the battlefield along with their men. Jacques grits his teeth in sheer frustration. He's so stubborn that he refuses to accept the truth. Instead, he convinces himself that the soldier must be exaggerating, likely shaken by the barrage of gunfire. Jacques reasons that muskets might be powerful, but their range is no more than 40 paces, and their reload speed and accuracy should be pretty slow. Even if the enemy troops are equipped with those weapons, he's confident that if they gather all their knights and charge during the reloading phase, they could overwhelm them. The remaining soldiers and servants could then swarm the enemy forces, giving them a chance to defeat them. Jacques orders his knights to call in the phalanx team, planning to advance behind their shields while the musket infantry follows. Not long after, a horde of enemy soldiers marches against our side of soldiers. The firearms enemy is equipped seems massive and terrifying at first glance. But as terrifying as it might be, it's clear their weapons still rely on outdated methods. Each shot takes forever to fire because the fuse has to burn completely to trigger the explosion, just like an old-school bomb. Time isn't something these guns have, and our soldiers take full advantage of that. With just a press of the trigger, they unleash a barrage of bullets, mowing down all the enemy soldiers in the front line. The enemy keeps getting hit, one after another, while Jacques Meade can only watch the scene in front of him, seething with anger. But anger doesn't win battles. In the end, he meets his fate, dead on the ground, surrounded by the soldiers who followed their foolish leader to their death. The prince makes his way to Petrov and his father in the castle. As soon as they see him, they drop to their knees in respect. But the prince quickly tells them to rise, praising them for holding out until the last minute against the 4 rebellious families. He promises that those families will pay dearly for their betrayal. Petrov, however, is consumed with guilt. He's deeply disappointed in himself for failing to protect the fortress for the prince, and the weight of this failure brings him to tears. But the prince simply tells Petrov to rise, emphasizing that he has done nothing deserving of blame. Deep down, the prince acknowledges the truth. You see, Petrov isn't cut out for battle. This rebellion and the earlier loss of the fortress only prove it. But that doesn't make Petrov useless, far from it. He's a natural when it comes to management, business, and seizing opportunities. While Petrov may not be a commander or capable of defending himself against military schemes, that doesn't mean he isn't a good ruler. In fact, the prince is already thinking of giving him a place far from the bloodshed of battle, where his talents for leadership and commerce can truly shine. The prince tries to reassure Petrov, explaining that this rebellion had to have been orchestrated from top to bottom. The enemy disrupted the order in the western region to steal what wasn't theirs. They committed horrific crimes, killing civilians from every class. Today, countless citizens have lost their families and homes. But the prince makes it clear that he doesn't plan to let those bastards win. He acknowledges that Petrov's resistance kept the fortress from falling into an even greater disaster. The bravery and courage of everyone here are worthy of the highest praise. However, the prince reminds them that the battle isn't over. The rebels are running as fast as they can, and now is the time to strike back. The prince vows that no enemy will escape justice, whether they're hiding in the territories of the four families or even in the capital. The mastermind behind this rebellion will be held accountable. Starting tomorrow, the prince declares, the First Army will march to conquer the rest of the western region outside Longsong Fortress. Any aristocrat who dares to resist will be dealt with on sight. He orders his army captain that he wants the western region to be unified by next week. Iron Axe salutes the prince, acknowledging his orders. And it's not just him. All the soldiers stand tall and salute their lone prince, recognizing him not just as a leader, but as their king. The scene transitions to René Meade, the younger brother of Meade Jacques, the same cocky sucker who got killed because of his cockiness in the battle. René has been locked up behind bars by Jacques because he refused to rebel against the prince. René is also Petrov's closest friend, making it impossible for him to attack someone he holds so dear. Years ago, when Duke Rayan was defeated, it was Petrov who saved René from prison. From that moment on, René abandoned any ambition to challenge Jacques for the position of family head. All he wanted was to become one of Prince Roland's knights. Now, trapped in the cell, René sees clearly the mistake his brother has made by rising against the prince. Suddenly, his sister arrives, carrying food for him. Her first question is about Petrov, especially since she has feelings for him, so naturally, she's worried. But before René can answer, the entire palace begins to shake. Moments later, soldiers from border town barge in. Standing before the siblings is Iron Axe. He looks directly at René and asks if he is René Meade, the second son of the Elk family. Before René can respond, his sister answers the question, confirming his identity. Iron Axe then reveals his purpose. He has been sent by Prince Roland Wimbledon to find them. He adds that Petrov has personally requested to see both René and his sister. The scene shifts to Longsong Fortress, where the prince is inspecting the firearms used by the enemy soldiers. As far as he can tell, these so-called guns don't even qualify as firearms. They lack a trigger or firing mechanism, and are little more than metal pipes with open ends. As the prince reflects on this, Iron Axe enters the room, accompanied by René Meade and Aurelia Meade. The siblings promptly bow to pay their respects to the prince. The prince quickly commands them to rise and begins by revealing something important. Before he ordered Iron Axe to march on the Elk family's territories, Petrov had assured him that René would never participate in Jacques Meade's rebellion, so the prince is relieved that this turned out to be true. He reminds René of the devastation caused by his brother's rebellion, which was supported by the other families. Countless civilians were killed, 2 cities were destroyed, and Petrov's family was murdered to force him into surrender. The prince sternly tells René that if he had stopped his brother, Longsong Fortress might have been spared from this tragedy. He makes it clear that everyone who participated in the rebellion will face justice, and every rebel will be punished for their actions. However, the prince reassures René that no harm will come to those who are innocent. He also promises that the Elk family will not face extinction as long as they remain loyal. First, the prince informs René that Jacques Meade has perished during the rebellion. He then asks René if he would like to inherit the title of Earl and serve under him. René bows his head without hesitation and pledges his loyalty right away. Turning to his friend Petrov, René apologizes for the pain caused by his family's actions. However, Petrov quickly reassures him that none of this was his fault. René reflects on earlier times from the earlier chapters, the time when he once proposed that Petrov marry his sister. René is fascinated that the bond they share as friends has not weakened in all those years. Afterwards, the mission to unite Western Region continued. The rebels stood no chance against the prince's first army. The outcome of most battles was decided in a single firefight, with the rebels crumbling before they could even reload their primitive weapons. They fell apart like a sack of potatoes. The First Army spent most of its time pursuing the rebels and conquering territories. They captured one stronghold after another, day by day. The Elk, Leaping Wolf, and Wild Rose families were the first to fall. However, the campaign stalled when the army reached the Maple family's palace. the soldiers encountered an unexpected obstacle, a moat surrounding the palace. 2 soldiers were injured in an initial attempt to approach, and it became clear they couldn't fight effectively while the enemy maintained the high ground. If they wanted to breach the gate, they would have to attack from the bridge, but that was heavily guarded and under constant watch. The commander, whose name escaped my head, lamented not having the artillery team with them. A few well-placed cannonballs could have easily shattered the gates and resolved the siege. Iron Axe highlights an important detail. Reports indicate that the Maple family didn't contribute many soldiers to the rebellion, and their earl didn't even show up. This means their forces are still at full strength, making it unlikely they'll succeed without heavy weaponry. Reflecting on the past, Iron Axe notes that if this had been during his time in Iron Sand City, he wouldn't have hesitated to lose hundreds of soldiers to fulfill his chief's orders. But now he's watched his soldiers grow and become who they are today, and he refuses to risk even a single life unnecessarily. With no artillery or heavy weapons available, the only viable option is to ask for the witch's help. A few days later, Maggie appears soaring through the skies, heading straight toward the Maple family's castle. The soldiers on the walls fire arrows at her, but her massive body renders them completely ineffective. In the next moment, Maggie drops a giant TNT onto the palace. The explosion is immediate, and takes the entire structure in flames, reducing it to a charred ruin in a single swoop. Iron Axe stood watching as the Maple family fell, and with their defeat, he gave the final signal for his soldiers to charge forward. The Maple family was taken down completely. By the time Iron Axe returned to Longsong Fortress, it was the 6th night, and the entire western region was finally under the prince's control. Petrov then came to meet the prince, carrying the completed reports and estimates. He had organized the remaining aristocrats of the western region into categories, and even listed them in alphabetical order by name and criminal status. The findings were staggering. 64 aristocrats were found guilty of participating in the rebellion. 137 aristocrats either refused to participate or were unaware of the rebellion. The rest were knights, nobles, or other non-participating aristocrats. The highest-ranking guilty party was Roman Camellia, the Earl of the Maple family, who had already been captured by Iron Axe. The rebellion had wiped out the 6 prominent families of the western region. The Lion, Leaping Wolf, Maple, and Wild Rose families were now effectively extinct. The Honeysuckle and Elk families had been spared, but their influence and power had been reduced to nothing. With the rebellion crushed, the entire western region was now firmly under Prince Roland's command. Petrov reports that Iron Axe has provided him with a list of criminals, but he's unsure if he should hand it over. He worries that Iron Axe may have made a mistake in his judgment. However, the prince assures him that Iron Axe is incredibly skilled at interrogations. The prince trusts Iron Axe's final ruling. In fact, every aristocrat prisoner had been verified by Nightingale, ensuring that no innocent person was punished. Petrov then asks the prince what he plans to do with the guilty aristocrats. Seeing the hesitation on Petrov's face, the prince asks if any of his friends are listed among the criminals. Petrov replies that none of his friends are involved, but he's concerned that executing the criminals might pose a risk to his rule. He worries that doing so could stir unrest and opposition among the citizens, leading to potential rebellion against his leadership. The prince, surprised by Petrov's political maturity, realizes that Petrov has thoughtfully considered the consequences. He's impressed by how Petrov has set aside his personal feelings, weighing the outcomes of such a decision. Instead of growing bitter and cynical about the violence, Petrov has learned and matured from it. The prince reveals his plan to Petrov, explaining that he intends to publicly announce the entirety of the situation. He will list the names of the rebels, including aristocrats, soldiers, servants, and guards. The organizers who directly instigated the rebellion will be executed, along with others who committed murders. The remaining rebels will be sent to other mines for labor. In the end, only 5 or 6 aristocrats will be executed. The public will likely assume that the rest were spared because of their expired privileges. The prince believes that, after this, no one will consider the actions cruel or unusual. After all, rebellion is a grave offense. With the obstacles in the western region now cleared, the prince is confident that the new laws and systems will be respected and implemented without hindrance. He sees this as a significant step toward building a true city, where order and structure prevail. The prince plans to begin the renovation of his fortress, starting with the installation of French windows. 3 days later, the prince gave a speech at the Longsong Fortress Theater. First, he offered condolences for the rebellion's casualties and distributed a pension. Then, he made some announcements about his new policies. The theater's audience was smaller than he expected, and the snow had discouraged most people from leaving their homes. Those who were present were skeptical of these promises. After all, corruption had led to famine in the past, and even emergency rations were mixed with sand and leaves. So receiving golden royals seemed too good to be true. Of course, when he actually did distribute the golden royals, the atmosphere changed drastically. Many more people showed up for the aristocrats' trial, and the entire theater was packed. Some even sat in the corridors. Criminal trials and executions still served as common entertainment for people everywhere. In the end, 132 people were sentenced to execution, and the other 900 or so had participated in the rebellion, but didn't kill anyone. As a result, they were sent to the northern mines. The power of the western region's aristocrats was finally wiped out. However, clearing these obstacles was just the beginning. Creating a new order was the most important condition for true governance. To lighten their moods, the prince prepared a grand banquet. Since the large families like Honeysuckle and Elk were all on the prince's side, the remaining smaller families tripped over themselves to praise our prince. Even at this small banquet, they praised the tiniest things, like the chopsticks and the food. Now, it's safe to say they were trying way too hard. The prince then grabbed everyone's attention and announced that he would like to share an art album with them. When they saw the drawings, their eyes widened. The images looked incredibly realistic, and it didn't seem like they had been drawn by hand. No pigments could express such detailed colors. Seeing this, the prince was pleased that the city's upper class had an appreciation for art. He then corrected them, explaining that the drawings were indeed created by hand. But the distinction was that the artist was a witch, and her pigments were made with magic, which was used in every image. As soon as the mention of witches came, everyone's mood dropped faster than the guy who always make dad leaving me jokes in the comment section. The church's influence has been eradicated long ago, and the prince assures them that witches are not much different from normal citizens, something he has emphasized many times. Of course, they believe the prince and are ready to place their faith in his words. He then shows images of former aristocrats from the western region in the album, such as Tegu Pine, whom he believes most of them would even personally know. He currently lives in Bordertown, and this album serves as a record of his life there. As they can see, Tegu Pine is an aristocrat living under the new order. He is currently training in marksmanship to protect Bordertown, and once the turmoil settles, he plans to take his daughter and servants hunting in the misty forest. Ever since selling his territory to the prince, he has settled in Bordertown. His noble rank has been raised by 1 level, and his family's assets have grown many times over. The prince then reminds them how he has already revealed his plans to build a city in the western region. So Bordertown, Longsong Fortress, and the land in between will become one. Of course, this unification will be in terms of administration. In other words, the new city will follow the same laws and policies the prince has set up. This is part of the reason why he needs to collect aristocratic territories and assume bureaucratic powers. One person questions what will happen to their lands. The prince assures them that the land will still belong to them. Under this new order, any invasion attempt will be dealt with by the military. As long as everyone follows the law, there will be more opportunities for them to profit than they could ever imagine. The principle is similar to the cake he is cutting right now. Why settle for a small slice now when they can have a much bigger piece? None of them have been to Bordertown, so it's normal that no one knows just how much bigger it can be. During the 2 previous quarters, Bordertown income has reached 30,000 golden royals. Of course, this revelation boggles everyone's mind. The prince continues explaining that if it weren't for the month of demons, that number would have grown by another 10,000 by now. Since aristocrats will manage their own business, these numbers will come to them soon. One of them asks if the prince is basically implying that they will have to run the fortress. The prince responds with a yes, but also with a no. You see, the fortress will become a region of the city, governed by the general city hall. The prince will build a branch of the city hall at Longsong Fortress, and it will follow the Bordertown's format, creating many smaller departments. Each of them will work at these departments and handle their respective operations. Managing a region is an incredibly complicated job, and while it can bring huge benefits, it's not easy to handle. After everything settles in Longsong Fortress, all of the new aristocrats will come to Bordertown in order to gain experience firsthand how an effective city hall is run. Everyone present here will also have to take classes on management. For now, this is all the prince has to share. The next topic is about rats, and he wants to ask what everyone knows about these shady people. Renee reveals that rats collect intel on the streets, and that he used to be affiliated with them. The prince curiously asks what kind of relationship he had with the rats, to which Renee hesitantly admits that he used to be the leader of the Blazing Fire Gang and had helped other gangs fight for territory before. The other representatives choke on their tea upon learning that Renee, from the Earl's family, had once been a rat. Even the prince is disturbed by this revelation. But before anyone jumps to conclusions, Petrov decides to clear the air. He explains that a few years ago, the rat presence at the docks was at an all-time high, with civilians and visiting merchants being attacked every day, yet the city guards did nothing. Petrov could not stand it, so he brought his own guards and recruited people from the slums to drive the rats out. Renee even sent Petrov daily letters when Petrov was in the capital, claiming that it was a glorious battle, one on par with fighting demons. While Renee is dying of embarrassment, The prince expresses his plan to remove every rat from Longsong Fortress so that civilians can live in peace. But Renee objects to this idea. He acknowledges that while rats are just everyday people, they wouldn't stand a chance against knights. However, if rats are labeled as criminals in order to get rid of them, there won't be many people left in Longsong Fortress. He explains that people often change from civilians to rats, or vice versa, and many become desperate when the months of demons are prolonged. It's why many rulers allow black markets and criminal activity to exist. They prefer the rats to fight among themselves rather than risk creating a huge riot. The prince then inquires who organizes the rats, to which Renee reveals that some are local aristocrats, while others are foreign criminals. The prince is glad that no one present here owns a gang. However, it would be fine even if they did, as the prince wouldn't mind as long as they cooperate in clearing out these bad nests of rats. He then addresses Renee and assigns him the mission to put an end to all illegal activity in the fortress within the next month. Renee will need to cooperate with the First Army and eliminate various gang leaders to crush all rat organizations. He also commands Petrov to open the fortress's food inventories and distribute more rations. Some present there quickly object to this idea, arguing that if they coddle the public, they will only demand more, and by then, everyone will become beggars in the city. The prince finds himself disappointed that these aristocrats could only think of the negative all the time, which makes him believe they are lazy and foolish. He is certain that all these commoners need is a good role model and proper direction, and they will become the real backbone of the world he is trying to create. So he declares that he has made up his mind, and this will be his first lesson in teaching how to run a proper city hall. Every citizen needs to understand every detail of public policy. He wants everyone to answer the public's questions and listen to their feedback, because this is how an administration avoids becoming an empty shell. You see, new ideas, unified laws, enforcement, and political transparency are everything the prince is preparing for his new order. The scene then transitions to Sister Echo, followed by Iron Axe, who reminds her that the fortress is not as safe as Border Town, so she shouldn't wander alone. The prince had also asked him to guard her if she left the castle without any other witches. Every time Iron Axe talks to her, he refers to her as Chief. After all, she was the chief of the Osha tribe under her former name, Drow Silvermoon. She doesn't like being called by this title, but Iron Axe continues to do so because this is how he sees her, even to this day. The other citizens begin to stare at them, so she decides to wander off to the other side of the shore. As she walks around, Echo points out how Iron Sand City was nothing like this. Before leaving the southern region, she thought the entire continent looked the same and never expected anything other than sand. Water and oases were precious resources that people would die for, but here, no one would bleed for the Redwater River, and water is available everywhere. But Iron Axe reminds her that people still fight for other things, such as golden royals, jewels, pride, and status. He believes that battles are everywhere, no matter the circumstances. Echo, however, still believes that the prince could stop the war. Even Nightingale told her that the Sand Tribes, Grey Castle, Mortals, and Witches, all of them would enjoy resources equally and live as they wish. She then questions Iron Axe if he wants to return to Iron Sand. The big guy responds that he has already sworn allegiance to the three gods and will serve Roland Wimbledon forever. However, she doesn't need to worry, as the prince promised her revenge, and he won't go back on his word. When the day of their return comes, everyone will respect them. But Echo doesn't want to be the chief of the Osha tribe anymore. She likes to stay near trees and greenery, and she enjoys being with Wendy and Nightingale. She also likes to learn the songs that the prince teaches her. While she does wish to go back and visit one day, she doesn't want to remain in the desert and endlessly quarrel for water. She decides to start practicing her voice here, as no one is around and she won't be disturbing anyone. She tells Iron Axe that she has made a song for her home and wants him to hear it. She explains that she used the techniques the prince taught her, advising her to mix different instruments together to create a layered tune. But the names were strange. She is sure that only the prince would come up with words like techno and heavy metal. Iron Axe just smirks, believing that the prince is naturally different, and in fact, he is the child of God. Echo then begins her singing, and as she sings, the atmosphere around her begins to shift. Since this song is directed at her home, the entire mood changes, and the scene starts to transform into a sand-filled landscape, even though it's the dead of winter. Once Echo stops singing, everything returns to normal. However, Iron Axe notices that the sand that appeared during her singing is still present on his hands. Later, he reports this to the prince, explaining that he saw the desert in Echo's voice, and even found specks of sand. He emphasizes that he didn't find them intentionally. He was completely immersed in the moment, and didn't even consider if what he saw was real. The prince is unsure of what to make of this, while Iron Axe continues to convince the prince that what he is saying is the truth. Although when she sang other songs, he did not see much, but the experience was surreal. The prince then presents the sand to Nightingale, asking if she can tell whether it is the product of magic. However, even Nightingale has no clue what is going on, as there is no trace of magic on the sand. But when she looks at Echo, she can see that her magic has solidified. Sister Echo seems glad to hear this happy news, while Nightingale reports that Echo's magic is like a blue jewel, as clear as water, and she is just as strong as Maggie. The prince then suggests that although sand is everywhere, Iron Axe wouldn't claw through the snow and dig some out to trick him. With that in mind, he wants to test her abilities himself and tells Echo to sing the tune she created for her homeland. As soon as she does, the entire building begins to echo with her sweet voice. After hearing her tone, Nightingale reports that she heard the sound of wind through the trees, and the temperature rose slightly. But the prince states that he didn't see a desert, which means perhaps her magic didn't work as expected. Iron Axe continues to insist that he indeed saw the desert. The prince then decides to conduct another test, telling Echo to just sing the song he taught her. Echo begins singing again, and it seems like the experience is different for everyone. For instance, the song Gorillas that Echo played makes Sylvie remember the fear she felt when she first saw a cannon fire. The prince has also started to figure out that a song becomes more significant if the audience has a personal memory related to it. Only then can they truly sink into the illusion it creates. Iron Axe relates to the southern region's culture and environment because he grew up there, and that's why he can feel the desert in Echo's song. Since the prince himself hasn't been there, he can't experience the same thing. However, the prince doesn't have the means to test the full extent of Echo's abilities for now, but he is very curious. He wonders if, when the audience is fully immersed, the illusion could actually become reality. He has high hopes for Echo's new ability. He sees the potential for her to motivate soldiers, calm crowds, and perform in the theater, using her magic to influence those around her in powerful ways. Her influence over emotions would be a priceless asset for our prince in the coming days. The scene transitions outside, where Renee delivers an announcement on behalf of the protector of the Western region, Roland Wimbledon, and the minister of Longsong Fortress, Petrov. Starting today, the Fortress City Hall will purchase any extra grain from citizens. However, beginning next month, all private sales of food will be considered a crime. Only the City Hall will be allowed to buy and sell grain. Anyone caught committing this crime will be severely punished, and anonymous reports will be rewarded with 25 silvers. The announcement sparks an uproar among the citizens, who find it ridiculous that Petrov is planning to ban private food sales. Renee tries to calm the crowd, assuring them that he will address all their questions one by one. Meanwhile, the scene cuts to this shady hobo kid, who looks like he's on a mission. From his perspective, he believes that what Renee just announced will cause chaos. If the aristocrats and merchants hoard all the food again, a massive riot is inevitable. After all, most people depend on the rats for their food supply. In a back alley, this blonde teenager meets with a group of his fellows and quickly reports what he overheard. He expresses his confusion about what the wealthy are thinking and shares his concern about how they'll manage to get food now. This group of hobos begins to worry about their future survival. They mention two witches, Paper and Fang, who used to help them earn food. While we haven't met Fang yet, we know Paper has already been escorted to Border Town by Petrov. Kanash, the local underworld boss who dominates shady dealings in this particular area, becomes their main concern. They fear he'll use this food crisis to blackmail them at every turn, further tightening his grip on their lives. But their worries are eased right away when they hear the announcement that everyone will be entitled to 2 bowls of hot porridge per day, served at noon and night. The initiative is presented as an act of generosity from Prince Roland. The scrawny and sickly boy in this group feels relieved at the news. For a brief moment, he wonders aloud if this might mean they no longer have to worry about being threatened by Kanash for food. However, his more cautious friend quickly clamps a hand over his mouth, because speaking ill of Kanash in public could lead to serious trouble if overheard. Meanwhile, Renee continues with the announcement, revealing more about the City Hall's plans. Alongside the porridge distribution, Prince Roland intends to crack down on criminal activities that threaten the lives and properties of the citizens. Renee warns everyone to steer clear of black markets, pubs, gambling houses, and other places associated with trouble during this time. He assures them that the prince has provided public safety officers and police to maintain order and protect the people. The group of hobo kids begins to worry again. They fear they might be forced out of the city entirely, and if that happens, they have no idea where they would go or how they would survive. The scene then shifts to Kanash, who is shown smirking wickedly. He appears unfazed by the City Hall's measures. In his view, no aristocrat, no matter how influential, can truly maintain control in foreign territory. What truly matters, he believes, is who controls the local power. Even the King of Grey Castle, in his opinion, rules in name only. In simple words, Kanash basically thinks that rats are the need of the filthy rich, otherwise they won't be able to run their business. Though Kanash is confident in his own perspective, he finds the second part of the announcement strange. Normally, if those in power wanted to issue free food to gain support, they would inform the rats first, ensuring the system worked smoothly. Yet this time, it seems like the food distribution plan is being presented as something meant for the entire city. To him, this approach seems excessive and unusual. He resolves to consult his boss, the leader of the Bloodhand gang. Only his boss knows the full extent of what's really happening behind the scenes. It turns out the information about the City Hall's announcement was brought to Kanash by none other than the blonde kid and his hobo friends. However, instead of rewarding them for delivering such crucial news, Kanash reacts with cruelty. He completely bans them from ever tasting the porridge offered by the City Hall. Moreover, he threatens that if they are caught sneaking out to eat the free food, they should consider their mouths sewn shut as punishment. Later, as the group walks through the grimy streets, the blonde kid is determined to taste the porridge despite Kanash's warning. His cautious friend reminds him of the threat they were given, but the blonde kid brushes it off. He reassures them that their friend Sunflower is keeping watch, and that right now, and Kanash's closest followers are currently all huddled by the fire, so no one will notice they've slipped away. But the scrawny friend they are carrying, whose name is George, is in worse shape than ever. His condition is rapidly deteriorating, and anyone suffering from the freezing sickness won't survive without food. The black bread Kanash gave them is nowhere near enough to stave off hunger, and George needs something more, and a bowl of hot porridge might be the only thing that can give him a chance to survive. As they arrive at the City Hall to receive the porridge, the blonde kid is actually surprised that food is actually being served. The line stretches long, and as they try to sneak into the front, one of the City Hall officials warns them not to push or cut the line, or else they'll be disqualified from receiving food. The blonde kid insists that his friend is sick and urgently needs food to survive. George has been starving for days and is now suffering from the freezing sickness. City Hall officer Wade quickly gestures to his fellow officer to take the sick boy and tells the other two kids that they can find their friend here once he has been cured. Instead of waiting in line for their share of porridge, the blonde kid decided to return to their camp. If they stay here, it would take at least half an hour to get the food, which could put Sunflower in danger. However, when they arrive, they find that their worst fears have already come true. She is already in danger. The filthy scumbags have strung her up with a rope around her neck. She's barely surviving, desperately balancing on her tiptoes on a short bench to avoid suffocating. She is getting brutalized because the others snuck out of the place. Before the two boys can intervene, the thugs cruelly kick the bench out from under her feet. The real horror begins. The blonde kid and his friend rush to save Sunflower, but the thugs are quicker. They strike the two boys over the head, knocking them unconscious. With the boys incapacitated, the scumbags turn their sadistic attention back to Sunflower. One of them decides to pry out one of her teeth, while another thug viciously pounds on the blonde kid, who is starting to stir. But suddenly, the rope around Sunflower's neck is severed, cut by someone or something unseen. This familiar purple mist starts to fill the area, and before the attackers can understand what's happening, shit goes to hell. In just a matter of seconds, two guys have been taken down. That is when someone crashes down from the rooftop, and it's Ash, the mad lad lady. More and more of the thugs swarm the area, but Ash swings her blade and sends everyone scattering in every direction. Nightingale is also present, having taken care of the other attackers with equal skill. The blonde kid rushes to tend to his injured friend. It's then that Officer Wade arrives, raiding the scene with her team. He demands that everyone drop their weapons, declaring the arrest is being made in the name of His Highness Roland. Seeing the overwhelming power of the City Hall forces, the blonde kid is left stunned and overwhelmed. The announcement turned out to be true. These officers, sent by Prince Roland, are indeed here to arrest the rats. By the way, as I mentioned earlier, he is the same kid who used to be with Paper, and he was devastated that Petrov took her away from him. But right now his eyes fill with tears when he realizes that the promises made by Petrov and the prince are not shallow. All the rats at the scene are arrested, including the group of kids. Nightingale approaches the blonde kid, telling him to answer truthfully. She asks him if he has ever killed anyone or robbed anyone. The kid quickly responds with no. Since he is spitting the truth, Nightingale tells him to go get some porridge. She then turns to the other two kids, but before she continues, the blonde kid asks her if she's a witch. Nightingale responds affirmatively, and the kid reveals that these thugs are Kanash's underlings, and that Boss Bloodhand is the true leader of the rat faction in the fortress. He believes that catching them is key to eradicating the entire rat faction. Nightingale reassures him, promising that no criminal will escape justice. This assurance brings a small, hopeful smile to the kids' face who were brutalized by these bastards. The three kids rush to join the queue, feeling a sense of happiness and relief now that they've been saved by a witch. They're excited about the possibility of meeting Paper someday. After standing in the line for a while, they finally reach the front and get their turn to receive food. As they collect their bowls, Renee announces that once the months of demons come to an end, Longsong Fortress and Border Town will combine to form a new city. The land in between will need to be developed, which means new jobs will be available for everyone. For the blonde kid, this means he won't have to live like a rat anymore, and with his new opportunities, he'll have a better chance of meeting Paper one day. But that's a story for later. We transition back to Border Town, where Wendy and Sister Scroll are sitting down for some tea, trying out a new blend from the City of Dawn. It's a peaceful moment, and they're enjoying the warmth of their drink. Meanwhile, Paper is in a different part of the town, focused on trying to ignite the stones in the Divine Sigil. Unfortunately, she's still not strong enough to light them all. After her little cute struggles, she turns to Wendy with a curious look and asks when she'll be able to ignite the second stone. Wendy, in her usual calm and wise manner, reminds her that she can only ignite the second stone once she's older and more powerful. In the meantime, Wendy suggests that Paper should just enjoy her hugs and focus on her growth. That is when the scene pans towards Spear Passy, who is sitting nearby. Passy appears to be somewhat jealous as she watches Paper and Wendy interact. The kind of bond and support Paper receives at such a young age is something that Passy realizes she missed out on during her own childhood, and it stirs up some emotions in her. Wendy then inquired of Passy about her recent experiences at the City Hall, as she had been visiting there frequently. Well, her visits were quite interesting. It is a place where there's much to learn. She remarks that it's the first time she's seen such a strict, orderly management system in place. It's far more efficient than the old ways, where just a few high-ranking officials dealt with everything themselves. The City Hall ensures its continued efficiency even if some employees leave, always keeping positions open for citizens to join. Passy is especially impressed by the regulations and laws Prince Roland has enacted, noting that they are very unique, something she has never seen anywhere else before. Just as they're discussing this, a City Hall officer enters and interrupts their conversation, reporting that a villager has come forward with a troubling claim. Apparently, the villager says that her daughter has just become a witch. Since Prince Roland isn't present at the moment, the officer explains that the prince had previously instructed the Witch Union to handle matters like this when he is not in the castle. Later, Wendy and Sister Scroll arrive at the registration hall. There is a mother along with her daughter, who is supposedly a witch. The mother claims that they are immigrants from the southern region, and they moved here like a month ago. Wendy inquires this supposed witch and asks her for her name. The timid young girl doesn't respond, so her mother beside her pushes her forward. Hesitantly, the girl introduces herself as Summer. The old hag then explains that her husband is still working in the boiler rooms, so she brought her daughter here on her own. She excitedly explains that she's heard witches receive a golden royal every month as salary. Wendy confirms this, and the woman becomes even more excited, practically pushing her daughter forward as she insists that they are ready to sign any necessary contract. Of course, both Wendy and Sister Scroll can sense that this mother is up to no good. Wendy calmly explains that joining the Witch Union requires an evaluation. Since Prince Roland is not present, Summer will need to stay at the castle for now, and the contract can be signed once the prince returns. The mother agrees without hesitation and promptly begins to walk away, leaving her daughter behind. The poor girl looks visibly anxious. Sensing her unease, Wendy gently explains to her that there's nothing to worry about. She adds that the Witch Union isn't anything like the terrible rumors people might spread. Later, Agatha joins them and hands Summer a magical stone. Wendy reminds Agatha that Summer isn't yet familiar with her magic, as it's only been 3 days since her awakening. Agatha assures her that there's no cause for concern. The stone she's provided is a balanced magic stone, designed to measure the overall level of magic within someone. While it's not as precise as Nightingale or Sylvie's abilities to sense magic, it's the best tool they have available to determine if Summer truly possesses magical powers. After the little test, Agatha confirms that Summer does qualify as a witch, specifically a summoner type, but her level is extremely low. Agatha further explains that it's not unusual for magic to be this weak early on since it hasn't fully gathered yet. It's still in a juvenile stage. They decide to figure out what kind of ability Summer has, so Wendy asks her to demonstrate. Without hesitation, Summer uses her magic, quickly forming a mirage. The illusion offers a glimpse of the past, where we see Sister Scroll and Wendy having that tea time. Everyone watching is left awestruck because the scene Summer creates looks incredibly lifelike. Agatha notes that while the ability to create illusions is rare, it's not unheard of. She recalls at least 2 other people in the Alliance with similar powers, one of them being a high-tier witch from Falling Star City. Meanwhile, Summer feels drained, having used up most of her mana. Wendy then asks her how many times she can use that ability in a day and whether she can control the illusions more specifically. The girl reveals that she can use her ability about 2 or 3 times a day. She hasn't tried going beyond that, but it gets increasingly tiring each time. Hearing this, Scroll explains that it sounds like magic depletion, which is pretty natural. Magic flows like water or swirls like fog. It's the source of her power every time she uses it. Scroll assures her that they'll slowly teach her about the other attributes of magic over time. Later, Summer demonstrates her ability again. This time, the scene she creates shows an event from about a day and a half ago, when the witches were having dinner together. Scroll records everything to share with the prince. Few days pass by, and Sister Scroll decides to send Summer back until Nightingale does not verify her identity. After all, they can't afford to take any risks when it comes to Prince Roland's life. So because of that, Summer had to leave. But she seems much more energetic when she leaves the castle after staying for a while. She asked lots of questions about the witches and the prince, clearly excited to learn more. Initially, Summer thought the prince was a scary guy who kept many women around him, but she soon realized it was just a misunderstanding. However, things didn't go as smoothly when Scroll took her back home. Summer's mother didn't take the news well. All this old hag seemed to care about was money. To resolve the issue, Scroll ended up giving her 1 gold royale to keep her quiet. Wendy isn't sure if giving Summer's mother money was the right decision. However, Scroll reminds her that if paying off that old hag can keep Summer safe from her mother's harsh treatment, it's a small price to pay. Scroll points out that there are many days ahead of them, and if 1 gold royale can buy Summer a more comfortable life at home, it's worth it. After hearing this, Wendy agrees. She actually hadn't thought about it that way before. She then reflects on how much better the prince understands the value of witches' abilities compared to her. Wendy admits she's neither as logical nor as calculating as Scroll when it comes to weighing risks. This realization makes her doubt whether she's fit to lead the witch union at all, but Scroll voices her opinion as well. She believes that no one cares more about the witches than Wendy does. Scroll explains that it was only after her time with Kara's Witch Association that she truly understood this. A witch who genuinely considers the well-being of her sisters, regardless of their powers, is the kind of person who deserves to lead. According to Scroll, that quality is Wendy's greatest strength. While the both ladies are having their conversation, they hear that the prince has returned, and a grand feast has been prepared to celebrate his arrival. The first thing the prince does is hold his most cherished waifu close to his heart. Of course, there are also the overly excited girls who rush in to hug him uninvited. The entire palace feels alive with joy, and the prince feels a deep sense of homecoming, finding solace in the warmth of these familiar smiles compared to the cold atmosphere of Longsong Fortress. Later, the prince makes his way to the library, with Anna quietly following him. He's pleased to see her there and quickly shows her the gift he brought back. It's a collection of historical records and legends, along with some secret lore about the western region, which he retrieved from the Duke's office. Before he can finish explaining, Anna closes the distance, and they share a heartfelt kiss. For a while, they decide to just savor the moment together, letting the world fade away. The next day, Wendy reports to the prince about the newly awakened witch in Border Town. After reading through the report, the prince agrees to take her in, and they decide she can sign a contract that very afternoon. After that, Wendy hesitantly brings up a matter that has been weighing on her. She admits that she doesn't feel capable of managing the witch union. In her view, Scroll is far more experienced and mature, making her a better candidate for leadership. The prince listens patiently, but already knows Wendy had shared this concern with Scroll. He also knows what Scroll's response was. He gently reminds Wendy of something important. Management techniques can be learned, but personalities are much harder to change. He points out that, aside from Maggie, she's the only one who truly adores all of the witches equally. Besides, the prince reminds Wendy that Scroll is already in charge of the education department, and her workload is only increasing. She wouldn't have enough time to focus on the new witches properly. He shares his vision of making the witch union self-sufficient, with minimal input needed from him. He wants the organization to be well-known and respected by everyone. To achieve this, he tasks Wendy with creating a proper management system to determine witch assignments. As for him, his role will focus only on guidance for evaluations and abilities. He also suggests that Wendy consult Miss Spear for specific advice on management. Additionally, she's free to recruit assistants or city hall workers to help her with administrative tasks. Wendy acknowledges her role with a little dose of confidence and decides to leave to start working on the system. Now that Roland is done with his paperwork, he decides to sort the books he had been working on yesterday. While doing so, he reflects on his romantic moment with Anna from the previous day. He notices how she's become more openly affectionate with him lately, a change that's impossible to miss. Feeling moved by her affection, Roland resolves to reciprocate her feelings more actively, deciding to take the initiative with her moving forward. As Roland sorts through the books, Nightingale suggests him not to keep Anna waiting. With those words, she disappears. Her words leave the prince with a lot to think about. He wonders if the best approach is simply to follow the social rules of his old world, to avoid hurting Nightingale and Anna any more than he already has. Just then, Summer arrives in front of the prince after passing Nightingale's test. Since the prince has already heard about her from Wendy, he hands over the contract papers. Summer quickly grabs the pen to scribble her name, but then hesitates. She gets embarrassed as she admits that she doesn't know how to write. The prince reassures her that there's nothing to be embarrassed about. He suggests she just press her fingerprint instead, which she does. Once done, Summer asks the prince why he decided to take her in, especially since she feels her ability is practically useless. The prince smiles and assures her that her ability is far from useless. In fact, it's something that any detective would dream of. Solving mysteries or crimes will be a piece of cake for her, and she'll come to understand that soon enough. He adds that, starting today, he assigns Nightingale as her boss to guide her. The scene transitions to somewhere in Border Town, in the room of the performer's crew. Here we meet Ferland's wife, Eileen, and Miss May, the star of the West and the object of Night Carter's affections. Miss May appears to be getting ready for a trip to the fortress. She's double-checking her bag to ensure she has everything she needs. Eileen suggests she pack an extra set of pillows, blankets, and sheets, but Miss May brushes it off, saying she doesn't really need them. Carter has also promised to buy her new clothes at the market. Apparently, the new stocks in the market come from raids on the 4 great families. While Eileen is delighted at the idea of getting high-quality fabric, Miss May feels proud knowing that the set Carter plans to buy is supposed to cost 5 gold royals. Hearing this, the people in the background are awestruck. For them, that amount is like 2 years' salary. But then again, it's not entirely surprising after all. Miss May used to perform in the capital, and her fame as the star of the West precedes her. As they continue chatting, Miss May asks Eileen about recent events, specifically recalling that Sir Eltec, Ferland's father, had come to Border Town recently. She's curious about how he's doing. Eileen quickly explains that the bulletin announced the prince had cracked down on all illegal activities in the fortress. The Maple Leaf, Leaping Wolf, and Wild Rose's families have been dismantled, and the Eltec family was dragged into the aftermath as well. Most of their troubles stemmed from Ferland's brother, Miso. Miso had been arrested by Prince Roland's soldiers after the failed rebellion. Since he hadn't harmed anyone and voluntarily surrendered, he was only sentenced to 10 years of labor. However, once he chose to rebel, he was no longer considered part of the family. In the end, Sir Eltec still wanted Ferland to be the heir. He believed the family could be great again in Ferland's hands. But Ferland just wanted to become a knight, and Eileen supports him no matter what decision he makes. At that moment, Night Carter unexpectedly shows up, leaving everyone a bit surprised since they weren't expecting him today. He explains that the prince had given him permission to leave early. He then presents a gift he bought for Miss May, which lightens the mood of everyone in the room. The side characters quickly catch on to the situation, so they excuse that they have work to do and eventually leave, giving the sweet couple some much-needed time alone. And as for the last time, I skipped over their relationship moment where they were all lovey-dovey and you guys grilled me hard for it. I did that because I know not everyone wants to stall the story. I've even seen people criticize me for throwing in a joke here and there, so I've been avoiding it. Honestly, no matter what you do, you can't please everyone. Carter apparently has brought new clothes for Miss May, and he specifically asked the prince to design them for him. Carter had told the prince about their upcoming engagement, and so the prince quickly suggested a type of clothing that would be perfect for a wedding. However, it was also quite difficult to make. To get it done, the prince hired Miss Soraya and had to use ice cream bread as the payment. Carter gave Miss May some time to wear the outfit. Later, he entered into the room back once she was ready. She looked absolutely stunning. This left Carter blushing so hard his cheeks turned as red as tomatoes, and everything felt so sparkling and fresh, like spring had already arrived. Carter then recalls that the prince had promised they could create a new type of wedding ceremony after the months of demons. He was really looking forward to that special day. The scene transitions to a conference room where representatives from every department have gathered for a meeting. The prince begins by explaining his plans to build a new city in the western region. Holding up a book titled Basic Kingdom Laws, he declares that everything written in it will serve as the foundation for this new city. The laws and systems outlined in the book will be implemented to ensure proper structure and order. He encourages everyone to read the book and freely ask questions or voice any doubts they might have. To get things started, he instructs Barov to read it aloud for everyone. Barov picks up the book and decides to begin with the abstract, which summarizes the proposed structure and organization of the new city. Barov begins reading aloud the key points of the Basic Kingdom Laws. The first is, all territory under Roland Wimbledon's control belongs to Roland Wimbledon. Second, the City Hall is the highest authority in the territory, and under Roland Wimbledon, it will be responsible for all management and maintenance in the Western region. Third, there are various ways for foreigners to become citizens, and the City Hall will offer at least 3 methods. Fourth, no civilians will be bound to a caste system. There will be no more slaves, servants, or serfs. Men and women will be equal, and civilians will be protected by law, with rights to protections and benefits through taxes. Fifth, aristocrats will be on the same level as any other citizen. Nobility will no longer have any authority, though it may still serve as an honorary title. Sixth, The safety and priorities of civilians will be ensured by Roland Wimbledon, and any violation of this is strictly prohibited. 7th, the territory will support legal businesses and a free market. Civilians will have inalienable rights to education, careers, and marriage. 8th, the new flag will be based on the towers and spears of the Grey Castle Royal Crest. It will feature a large 5-pointed star above the tower and 3 smaller stars below. The large star symbolizes Roland Wimbledon, while the smaller stars represent the City Hall, the military, and the Witch Union. 9th and the most critical point. The territory's name will be Neverwinter City. The months of demons finally come to an end, marking a day of grand celebration for the entire town. Prince Roland addresses the citizens, expressing his pride in their collective efforts. He emphasizes that the victory belongs to everyone who has contributed to the growth and defense of Border Town, regardless of where they come from. This success stands as a testament to their unity, resilience, and hard work. He reminds them that the threat of evil still lingers and will inevitably return. However, with their combined strength, victory will always be within their grasp. He encourages the townsfolk to embrace the moment and calls for everyone to celebrate their achievements and look forward with determination. The festivities include an elaborate stage show and a grand feast for all. The townspeople enjoy free meals, and for many, the abundance of meat is an extraordinary treat. The joyful atmosphere underscores their shared triumph and the bonds that hold the community together. As night falls, the focus shifts to the castle courtyard, where the witches hold a private celebration away from the townsfolk. However, not everyone is feeling these party vibes. Agatha, in particular, finds the festivities misplaced. She sees them as a distraction, convinced that preparation for the inevitable return of the devils is far more critical than celebrating. Prince Roland notices her unease and takes a moment to address her concerns. He tries to reassure her that one day of rest and celebration will not undermine their readiness for future battles. Offering her a glass of wine, he gently encourages her to relax and join the others, reminding her that victories, no matter how small, are worth acknowledging. As much as Agatha resists the idea of celebration, she reluctantly grabs the glass of fine wine from Prince's hand. Despite her stern outward mood, she allows herself to partake in the moment. The mood lightens further when Wendy unveils the highlight of the event, the giant cake especially produced for this very occasion. After the arrival of the cake, laughter and joy fill the courtyard as everyone indulges in the rare luxury. It becomes a night to remember, a heartfelt celebration of their shared efforts. After the festivities wind down, Prince Roland retreats to his room, only to find Anna waiting for him in the corridor outside. Prince then reveals a special gift he has prepared for Anna, which is a sigil crafted with 2 magical stones. One is a pathfinding stone, and the other a waypoint stone. When combined with magic, the sigil becomes a tracking device, allowing Anna to find him no matter where he is. With nervousness and sincerity plastered all over his face, Roland finally confesses his feelings and proposes marriage. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the moment we've all been waiting for has finally arrived. As for Anna, she's overwhelmed with emotions. She had dreamed of this day for so long, and now that it's a reality, tears stream down her face. It goes without saying that she says yes and reciprocates his feelings. In the quiet of the night, they spend some intimate time together, but since we don't need to get age-restricted, we'll skip ahead to the next morning. The prince wakes up, clearly disoriented. He's alone in his room and has no idea where Anna went. For a moment, he wonders if what happened last night was just a dream, but when he spots Anna's hair over the bed, he's convinced it was real. He quickly rolls over onto the blankets, hoping to catch her scent, but just as he starts to get a little creepy, Anna appears behind him. She scares him as she brings in some food. After setting the breakfast down, she tells him to eat well to regain his strength. But the prince insists on taking a few more days off for some extra fun. Anna shuts that idea down quickly. Like Agatha, she reminds him that they still have to fight the devils. Soraya and Agatha are working hard for this very reason, and she doesn't want to fall behind. Later, Princess Tilly comes to visit the prince. Seeing how cheerful he looks, she can't help but tease him, thinking he must have had a pleasant dream to be so happy. However, she quickly moves on to the real reason for her visit. Sadly, she is here to say farewell because it's finally time for her to return to Slumber Island. She has stayed here long enough and has kept in touch with the island only through letters. Now that the months of demons are over, her mission is complete. The prince suggests that she consider moving to Western Region instead. With the large expanse of land on the southern bank of the Redwater River, there's more than enough space to house all her witches. But Tilly reminds him that they've already discussed this, and her decision to return to Slumber Island hasn't changed. Despite this, the prince asks her to stay at least another week. He wants time to prepare something for her and the witches, a collection of books, study guides, and practice problems to help improve their learning and save them time. He also suggests she take some revolvers for protection in case they run into enemies wielding stones of divine judgment. He promises to send her steam engines as well. explaining they'll be useful for everything from irrigation to desalination. But the biggest reason he wants her to stay is so she can witness the grand opening of Neverwinter City with him. He hopes she can be there for the creation of the city, something he's been waiting to share with her. Later, Wendy comes across Nightingale sitting in a quiet corner, looking completely dejected. It's clear she hasn't slept at all. The expression on Nightingale's face is so full of devastation that it reminds Wendy of the day they first met. The cause of Nightingale's heartbreak is quite evident. It's troubling her that the prince is now finally with Anna. What makes it even harder to bear is that Nightingale herself had encouraged the prince to take that step. Although she insists she was prepared for this and always knew it was inevitable, the weight of reality has hit her harder than she expected. Wendy feels deeply concerned for her friend. Nightingale's broken state reminds her of the past, of the times when they had faced so much together. Nightingale had always been so brave, fighting countless battles without flinching and never showing fear, not even before Kara, as terrifying as she was. Yet now, this pain has completely shattered her. Wendy knows her friend needs comfort more than anything. She gently urges Nightingale to cry as much as she needs, letting her release the pain she's been holding in. Wendy then reflects on their shared reality. They have nowhere else to go and no one else to turn to. Staying by the prince's side is their only option, even if it comes with its challenges. Wendy reflects aloud that while everyone can enjoy the warmth of the sun, the closer you get, the more you risk being burned. It's a bitter truth they both must live with, but she promises to stay by Nightingale's side, offering whatever support she can. Wendy urges Nightingale to give up and move on, reminding her that she already has her sisters to support her. But Nightingale refuses, making it clear that she won't let the prince go so easily. No matter what, she is determined to protect him until the very end. This is her decision, and she won't back down. As spring blooms in full swing, people gather to celebrate the wedding of Miss May and the prince's knight, Carter. The couple looks stunning in their outfits, radiating joy as they make their way to the beautiful gazebo. Once they arrive, Bravo officiates the ceremony and prompts them to exchange rings. When they do, the moment becomes electric with emotion, and the crowd erupts in happiness. Carter, however, hesitates when it's time for the kiss, his nervousness causing him to tremble as he inches closer to Miss May. But Miss May takes the lead, and leaps forward to kiss him and save him from further awkwardness. Among them, Soraya busily paints each scene, determined to immortalize the memory through her art. After the ceremony, the prince offers his congratulations and announces a small but thoughtful gift: 2 days of vacation for Carter. He assures him that he'll take care of any pressing work so Carter and May can enjoy their time together. The wedding concludes successfully, with everyone showering the couple with blessings and happiness. The prince stands close to his beloved, holding her hand tightly as he quietly expresses that he too dreams of the day they'll share such a moment. Though surrounded by joy, Nightingale watches from the sidelines, her heart heavy and broken. All she can do is endure the pain in silence as the world around her celebrates. The scene transitions to a few days later. While the prince is busy shaving his beard, Baroff reports that the messenger pigeon has been sent to Longsong Fortress and is expected to arrive at their castle within half an hour. The prince inquires about the preparations for the upcoming event. Baroff informs him that everything was completed yesterday afternoon, and the venue is large enough to accommodate everyone in town. Apparently, this event is no ordinary gathering. The prince plans to announce the establishment of a new city. To emphasize the significance of this milestone and how it will affect the citizens of both sides, the announcement will be coordinated with Longsong Fortress. Both locations will deliver the news simultaneously, highlighting their unity and shared progress. The prince expresses hope that Petrov will receive the letter promptly. As expected, the messenger pigeon eventually reaches Longsong Fortress, delivering the message to Petrov. With everything in place, the simultaneous announcements begin in both Longsong Fortress and Border Town. The prince steps forward and formally greets the gathered crowd. He begins by expressing his belief that everyone present understands the significance of today's event. The small town, built on the slopes of the northern mines, will soon transform into a real city. He reflects on the past, reminding everyone of the annual nightmare that the months of demons once brought to Border Town. However, they proved that they could stand their ground. He recounts their triumphs over their enemies: Osmond Ryan, who sought to disrupt the peace of the western region and met his downfall; the Church, which tried to oppress witches and enslave the people but was ultimately banished; and even Timothy Wimbledon, whose schemes failed to defeat him. The prince points out that Timothy set the southern and eastern regions ablaze, yet Border Town remained unharmed, a living proof to their strength and resilience. He also speaks of the new king's atrocities, such as the sacking of Golden Wheat City, and the knights who acted no better than bandits. But the prince promises that such tragedies will no longer happen. This new city they are building represents their unity and strength. As long as the people stand together, no enemy will dare step foot in their lands. The prince vows to make their enemies pay for their wrongdoings. With pride and conviction, the prince announces that this place will become the new capital of Grey Castle. A new kingdom will be born here, one that will thrive even in the harshest winters. He assures the crowd that this city, no matter the season, will remain as warm and vibrant as spring. Finally, he declares that starting today, Border Town and Longsong Fortress will unite as one, Neverwinter City. The crowd erupts in cheers, their voices echoing across the square as they wave the flags of their new city high in the air. Princess Tilly is also present in the ceremony, witnessing the grand inauguration. She feels a deep certainty that the spark the prince has ignited today will one day grow into a roaring flame, spreading across the entire continent and reshaping its future. The scene shifts to the filthy witch, Zero. She's apparently been learning all about the prince's exploits so far. Against all odds, he escaped the royal decree for the throne, managed to defend himself against his better-prepared siblings, and even came out on top. It's all pretty intriguing to her. Zero also learns from the fourth prince's memories that she tried to kill him by poisoning his food. The poison was colorless and odorless, definitely fatal, but it didn't affect him at all. His leadership has drastically changed since then. He's won the favor of all his citizens and has even transformed the western region on his own. If he weren't the fourth prince, she wonders what he could have become. This is all getting pretty interesting, and she's absolutely looking forward to acquiring Prince Roland. She wants to absorb him, make him part of the church, just as it should be. That's when Isabella shows up. When Zero asks how her meetings went, Isabella mentions that she had a hard time befuddling those old men again, plus one geezer and 2 lunatics. Zero reminds her that it's not just about befuddling them. This connects to the church's entire lower system. Witches may be the core of the church, but they can't gather all the resources they need without the mortals helping them achieve their final objective. Isabella finally relents but says that, according to the others, it'll take until the second month of summer to move the resources needed for an attack from dawn to Grey Castle. She then reveals, rather disappointedly, that they have only about 400,000 pills left in their warehouse. On top of that, Isabella isn't sure if it's a good idea to let mortals fight the devils. They're talking about millions of people, and using the pills would quickly deplete Hermes' entire stock. She worries the church might not even win. Once mortals take the pills, their value only lasts a day. They're useless if they don't take enough, but they die faster if they take more. Zero feels a little disappointed that Isabella doesn't seem to understand her point. She explains that she never intended to use their berserker army to defend Hermes. The final battle, she says, will most likely take place at the ruins of Tequila. When Isabella questions whether Zero is planning to attack first, Zero reveals her reasoning that time is their most precious resource. She never thought sweeping all the devils at once was possible. It's simply unrealistic. The divine texts mention that when the underworld gate opens during the red moon, the devils will build a towering black structure. However, this tower isn't built, it grows. The material used for this construction was only referenced in the readings of the Alliance's third seat, and the expansion of devil territory requires these towers to produce red mist. Past towers have always been built in locations rich in stones of divine judgment. An enormous monster lives beneath each tower, its body even thicker than Tequila itself. This monster digests the stones of divine judgment, turning them into black crystals that diffuse red mist. Isabella finds it disgusting, while Zero points out that she doesn't know how long it takes to digest the stones, but it definitely doesn't happen overnight. During this time, the devils can't build their tower here. They can only ship it from their homeland. Zero wants to carve a bloody path through the devils with the berserker army, and then kill the buried monster with the divine judgment army. And if they're lucky, they might gain another 4 centuries of time. You see, the berserker army just can't replace the divine judgment army. The drug they use also affects the mortal's consciousness, but it won't touch their emotions. Against a truly terrifying enemy, they'll still feel fear, or even retreat. A broken army of millions will leave them defenseless. Of course, it won't be that easy. The berserker army will mostly be the lower followers of the church, but they'll be led by divine judgment soldiers. Unifying the kingdom is the only way to gain that many followers. Zero knows she has to gamble with humanity's fate and gather as many chips as possible. She tells Isabella not to fear the battle, because it's the unexpected rewards that are the sweetest. Their intelligence, bravery, belief, and sacrifice will determine their future, and this is what God wants to see, because the weak will never earn his smile. Isabella hopes for the best, though she is still curious about one thing. She wonders what would the fourth prince do if he were standing here right now. Zero dismisses the remark coldly. She's sure she won't fall against a mere human like Roland. But Isabella presses on with reason, pointing out that, according to Archbishop Taefun, the pure witch he sent to Grey Castle still hasn't returned. She simply disappeared without a trace. Not only that, they also lost a Fura in the capital, Archbishop candidate Mila, and the Longsong Fortress Cathedral. She tries to give Zero a wake-up call, reminding her that this is one of their biggest losses. It's as if, ever since they started meddling with the Western region, they've never won, as if God himself is protecting it. Although Isabella didn't want to say this, the word slipped out anyway, and this only serves to enrage Zero beyond belief. She quickly shuts Isabella up, reminding her that mortals know nothing about God. Mortals can only rely on knowledge and tactics, and those will all become a part of her. She believes that even if Roland has a method to defeat the devils, the Alliance will do better. When the Church conquers Grey Castle, the Western region will witness who is truly God's child. Isabella grows concerned, seeing how much her friend has changed. Zero is beginning to resemble the Pope in some ways. On the other hand, Zero is still shaken by the unsettling thought that Roland might actually be under some form of protection by the gods. As Isabella leaves the room, Zero reflects on how, no matter who the Pope is or who came up with the idea, anyone who enters the prayer room will drastically change. The highest level in the temple is the closest to God. She then walks into the temple, and after standing beneath the gazebo, she reveals that this is the only place where she can witness God's messages. She clasps her hands and begins her prayers. Her entire body begins to shimmer, and before her appears a demonic red eye. But according to her, this is supposed to be God's true form. The magic surrounding this supposed God is larger than the ocean, and its brilliance is brighter than the sun. This only reinforces her belief that only someone who wields such power could be God himself. This, she claims, is the red moon mentioned in the holy books. Through premonitions, she understands that humanity is weak and cannot protect anyone. The end of the Divine War is illustrated in 4 paintings. Once she enters the first picture, we see this throne, adorned with skulls. In the next picture, the city she wanders through is the origin of the devils, where they first appeared, on the northern peak of the Realm of Dawn. As she gazes at the throne, she reflects that she was supposed to find the protector of devils sitting there. But it's empty. It guards the secret of God. There are paintings, and according to the ancient records, it has been said that the contents of the second painting are subject to change. Some mention that it depicts a huge eyeball, while others say they saw bubbling volcanoes or an endless pit glowing at the bottom. No one sees the same thing, but as far as she can see, there is nothing. The Church's secret records once mentioned that in the early days of the First Divine War, there was something inside the other painting. When the war ended centuries later, the image faded to black. It makes her wonder if it's the aftermath of those rejected by God. Perhaps they are hiding something. As for the last painting, it's never been mentioned. If even the popes don't know about it, this secret could be lost forever. She starts to feel exhausted as she prays, and sadly for her, God did not respond today. She had thought that there would be nothing more to care about until she became pope, but her understanding of this world only skims the surface. There is a brand new secret in front of her, and her immortality is the perfect resource to chase it. She is truly the child chosen by God, and she can get closer. Centuries, even millennia, won't matter, because it will be worth it. I've got no clue what in the hell she just talked about all, but let's hope to soon get some context and figure out things. It's finally time for Tilly and her party to return, and the ship has arrived to take them. Andrea turns to the prince before boarding and says that she had a great time in the border town, but she's not sure if she'll be able to make the same ice cream bread when she gets back. In return, Prince promises to make even tastier food when she returns. That's when Ash chimes in with a verbal jab, telling the prince that they wouldn't mind if he kept Andrea for himself. After all, one less loudmouth on Slumber Island won't hurt anyone. Of course, both ladies immediately throw their usual jabs back at her, while the prince turns to his sister and tells her that if she runs into any problems on Slumber Island, she can let him know, and he'll do his best to help however he can. And, he adds, the city of Neverwinter will always welcome her return. Tilly thanks the prince and says she's also looking forward to him visiting Slumber Island as well. With that, the witches begin boarding the ship, and both Xavi and Andrea wave their hands for the last time. The prince seems quite dejected to see them go, and Nightingale quickly picks up on it, asking if he doesn't want to let them leave. The prince expresses how a bit jealous he feels. There are over 300 witches living on Slumber Island, and he wishes they could all move to the western region. But they shake off the gloomy thoughts and decide to move forward. On a sunny day in the Neverwinter, we meet the prince and Nightingale inside the office. Nightingale reports that the fortress rats are scuttling around again, which could push things out of control. The prince had expected this. Eradicating the rats will be a long process, with occasional surges, but as long as pressure is maintained while offering them better ways to live, they'll eventually disappear. That's the reason Petrov had mentioned he hoped the prince could provide help with skills and labor. Nightingale then asks if he intends to send her, as she doesn't seem too keen on leaving him alone behind. The prince reminds her that she is in charge of the security department, and she'll need to frequently travel between locations to oversee various jobs. But Nightingale worries that their enemies might send a witch assassin, and in that case, only she can protect him. The prince believes she's just overthinking, but Nightingale stubbornly sticks to her guns. No matter what he says, even Wendy and Scroll will stand by her side. That's when the prince reveals that he's going with her too. This finally calms Nightingale down, and the prince adds that she should bring Summer along as well, so she can learn how to use her abilities in practice. He also tells her to bring Sylvie and Soraya as they'll need to investigate the fortress mines and create an identification system. With that, the prince leaves Neverwinter with a select group of witches. Once they arrive, Petrov reports that they have a bigger issue at hand than the usual robberies and small crimes. There have been incidents that are more public, and they're happening against the police force the prince had deployed. According to Officer Wade, this should be called the Northern Outer District serial killer case. Renee further reveals that, starting 3 days ago, a civilian has been murdered every night. The victims were all male, lived alone with no family, and most importantly, all had received jobs from the city hall. A symbol was also painted in every room with blood, resembling a crown with an X later crossed over it. Since there was a symbol, Renee tried investigating the city hall and discovered that they were about to begin construction in the Redwater district. News of this had already spread through the northern streets, and people now believe that they will be killed once they accept jobs from the city hall. The number of applicants was already low, and now no one dares to sign up. In fact, a number of citizens want to quit their jobs as well. If this spreads to the other districts, it will be detrimental to their expansion plans. There were no witnesses, and no one knows where to begin the investigation. The prince questions Renee, asking how he solved something like this in the past. Renee reveals that the patrol never had a solid protocol. If it was a big problem, the victims' families would appeal to the city lord, and the lord would promise justice for the people. Only then would the patrol be pressured to make the criminals hand themselves over. The patrol, however, never cared if they were scapegoats or not, and they ignored victims who were foreigners or loners. That sounds quite horrible to the prince. You see, from what he's heard, this means almost everything is under the rats' control, so it's no wonder they were considered vital to the city. The prince has also observed that this world doesn't seem to have investigators. If there are no witnesses, it always results in a cold case. The prince quickly gives Petrov good news, telling him that the Department of Security will handle the case tomorrow. All he wants from Renee and Petrov is their cooperation. Nightingale then asks about his plans for this, to which the prince explains that he's not going to be directly involved. He needs to supervise the aristocrats on building the second city hall. The sooner he can finish that, the sooner Soraya can start making the ID cards. So the case is up to her now. He tells her that she will be in charge of the Department of Security and needs to decide how to crack the case. The entire police force of Neverwinter will eventually be hers to control. Wade, Renee, and anyone else will answer to her. But Nightingale reminds him that he was the one who told her that departments need to be balanced in power, and she doesn't fully understand how the city hall works. Wouldn't the Department of Security be lower in rank than the city hall? The prince places his hand over Nightingale's, startling her a little. He reminds her that the security of their land is more important than anything else, which is why she answers directly to him. It's also why she will control both the police force and any investigations involving the city hall or the military. All of their departments need to be tightly connected by a big net to prevent internal corruption. There's a saying that the strongest defenses always start to decay from the inside, and she will be the one to shield them from that happening. Seeing him putting so much faith in her just makes her feel flustered, and now she is looking forward even more to live up to his expectations. Later that night, overcome with excitement, she practically strangles Summer as she tells her they're going to catch all the criminals and make sure they never return to Neverwinter again. As Nightingale begins to plan their next steps, she tells Summer that her job will be to recreate the crime scenes. However, Summer objects, pointing out that she won't know what time of day the crime occurred, so how can she accurately recreate the scene? Also, after a week of practicing with Miss Wendy, she can only use her abilities 4 times a day. If she extends the duration of the illusions, that number goes down. Furthermore, she can't keep it up for more than 2 days at a time, or her exhaustion becomes overwhelming. Nightingale grows concerned. It'll be a problem if their recreations don't accurately reflect the criminal's presence at the crime scene. She then asks Summer if shortening the duration of her recreations would allow her to use them more frequently. Summer responds in a roundabout way that her magic drains quickly, and it won't make much difference. This makes Nightingale appreciate Spear Passy's power transfer ability even more. But since they don't have another option, she decides to take a gamble, predict a time, and hope for the best. She claims that her luck has always been good. After all, it's how she met Prince Roland. With that, the both ladies settle into bed. Morning arrives, and Renee formally introduces himself as Earl Renee Mead, at Nightingale's service under Prince Roland's orders. Nightingale reciprocates the gesture, introducing Summer as her assistant and witch. Renee expresses his eagerness to work with the 2 witches to find and capture the criminals. With that, the investigation begins. Nightingale requests that Renee take them to the crime scene. As Renee leads them toward their destination, Summer feels nervous being around someone of Renee's status. Nightingale reassures her that in Prince Roland's territory, titles don't carry much weight. She should not be afraid, as Renee would not belittle her. Moreover, the Department of Security is more important than the City Hall, making them his superior. As they walk, Renee shares that there was another victim last night, this time at the intersection between North and West Street. This marks the fourth murder, with each location being different. The killer appears to understand that staying in one area would be risky, especially now that the rats are no longer present. Once they enter the restricted crime scene, Summer is horrified by the sight of the old man's body brutally killed and lying on the ground. She trembles, feeling sick, and Renee suggests she step outside for some fresh air. Nightingale asks Renee when the body was discovered. Renee explains that it was this morning, when civilians came to fetch water. They found the corpse and noticed the door was left open, almost as if the killer wanted to make sure everyone saw it. In the past, it might have taken 2 or 3 days to report. But thanks to the City Hall offering rewards for information, someone immediately reported it. The victim's name is Pickaxe, a free citizen with no known ties to anyone or anything, which underscores that he might have been a rat in a past life. Nightingale then inquires if anyone saw him the previous night. Renee confirms that he asked around, but no one saw anything, and no one heard anything either. After thinking it over, Nightingale concludes that killing an adult like this would have made noise. Pickaxe didn't die immediately from a slit throat. He must have struggled or at least thumped against the floor, making a significant sound. She then questions whether the witnesses could have lied. Renee doesn't believe that's likely. The civilians are too fearful to lie, and since anyone who helps the police is rewarded, they don't have a reason to do so. Nightingale decides to call everyone who is nearby and conduct her own questioning. She then turns to Summer, instructing her to go to the castle and bring Soraya. Later, we find Nightingale standing in frustration, because not only Soraya but also the other 2 girls have barged in uninvited in the midst of such a serious criminal investigation. She scolds Lightning sharply while asking whether she isn't supposed to be protecting Prince Roland while she's away. Lightning explains that Prince Roland is engaged in a conference with the elites in the Grand Castle Hall, so he's not in any danger. Furthermore, Sylvie is still present, and with her around, no one would dare approach the prince. Despite this, Nightingale fumes with anger and orders them to return to the prince before the conference concludes. Back to the investigation, Nightingale gives Soraya the task of drawing the killer. Summer replay the murder, and Soraya will use her abilities to produce the visuals of the killer's face. Renee believes that if they can obtain a clear image, they should plaster it across the billboards in the fortress, as that's the fastest way to catch the criminal. However, Nightingale points out that it may not work as planned, especially considering the limitations of Summer's illusions. They will need to be lucky for it to find the exact time when the crime took place. She then tells Summer to replay the events between midnight and dawn. When Summer begins to replay the events, they see the old man sleeping peacefully in his bed. Nightingale instructs Summer to extend the timeline slightly after midnight, as the killer would have needed extra time to draw the symbol after the murder. As soon as Summer does this, the killer materializes, who is busy drawing the symbol on the wall with the old man's blood. However, they can only see the killer's back since he is facing the wall. Nightingale instructs Summer to replay the events just before the man was facing the wall. After doing so, they finally get to see the killer's face. Well, it seems like Bro has been caught in Ultra 4K.